He didn't even have the decency to close the door. That was the part Vivian Cross couldn't stop thinking about, not the words. Not the woman sitting across from Roman at that mahogany table. Not even the way Roman's hand rested casually on Celeste Marrow's wrist, like it had always belonged there. Door, left wide open, like Vivian wasn't worth the effort of a private betrayal. She had walked past it by accident, carrying the seating chart the wedding planner had asked her to approve. 36 hours before the rehearsal dinner, 20 hours before the ceremony walkthrough, and there was her fiancé, calm as a man discussing quarterly earnings, telling his inner circle that the engagement to Vivian Cross was being terminated, effective immediately, and that Celeste Marrow would be taking her place. Vivian stood in that hallway for 4 full seconds. Then she tucked the seating chart under her arm and walked back to her room. If you've ever had a moment where the world rearranged itself so completely that your body just kept moving on autopilot, kept breathing, kept walking, kept functioning, while your mind was somewhere 10 feet behind you, still standing in that hallway, still processing what your ears had just delivered, then you understand exactly where Vivian Cross was in that moment. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't go back and demand an explanation. She sat on the edge of the bed in the room. Roman had assigned her a beautiful room. Everything expensive, nothing personal. And she looked at her hands for a long time. Before we go any further, if this is your first time finding this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because the stories we tell here don't pull punches, and they don't wrap things up in pretty bows. Real drama, real emotion, real consequences, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to Vivian. The engagement ring was a 2-carat oval diamond in a platinum band. Roman had presented it to her 14 months ago in a restaurant he'd booked out entirely, for the occasion 90 tables, all empty, 1 small plate of food, candlelight, the whole performance. Vivian had said yes because she believed at that point that Roman Valenti was a man who would protect her. She grew up understanding what men like Roman were. Her father had been adjacent to that world, never a player, always a facilitator. The kind of man who handled paperwork for people who didn't want their names attached to paperwork. He died owing favors to 3 different organizations, and when Vivian was 19, one of those organizations came to collect. Not from him. From her. She spent her 20s navigating spaces where the rules were unwritten and the consequences were physical. She learned how to read a room before she entered it. She learned which silences meant danger and which meant indifference. She learned that in those worlds, a woman's value was always conditional, always leveraged against something else, and the moment you forgot that, you became a liability. Roman had seemed different. That was her mistake, not naivety, exactly, but a kind of exhausted optimism. She had been surviving for so long that when something resembling stability appeared, she reached for it without examining it closely enough. She examined it now. Sitting on the edge of that bed, she turned the ring over in her fingers and thought about the past 2 years with the cold clarity of someone who has just had a fever break. Every dinner where Roman's eyes tracked other women. Every conversation cut short when she asked too many questions. Every business trip where he returned smelling like someone else's cigarettes and never offered an explanation. She had filed all of it away. Told herself she was imagining things, told herself she was being paranoid, told herself that a man like Roman chose stability, not passion, and she could be stable. What she hadn't filed away, what she had actually documented, meticulously, quietly, over 18 months of careful observation was everything else. The shell companies, the account numbers, the names of the judges and the aldermen, and the federal liaisons who looked the other way when Roman's trucks moved through certain neighborhoods at certain hours. The coded ledger system his lieutenant Dante Rusk maintained on a laptop that Vivian had once watched Dante leave unattended for 11 minutes in the study while he took a phone call in the garden. 11 minutes was a long time. Vivian was a fast reader. She set the ring on the nightstand and went to the closet. Behind the hanging garment bags, one of which contained the wedding dress, still in its protective sleeve, still smelling like the seamstress's perfume, there was a small black duffel bag that she had packed and repacked 6 times in the past 4 months. One change of clothes, a burner phone activated a USB drive, a manila envelope containing printed documents she had photographed, using an app that left no trace on her main device, and $12,000 in cash, drawn out in increments of $500 across 8 months from 4 different accounts. None of them flagged, because none of the individual withdrawals crossed any threshold worth noting. She had been planning this exit since month 6, not because she had known for certain that Roman would do something like this, but because she had grown up in rooms where exits mattered, and she had promised herself, at 19 years old, standing in her father's kitchen while men in expensive shoes told her what she owed them, that she would never again be in a situation where someone else controlled every door. She changed out of the silk blouse Roman's assistant had selected for her that morning and put on a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. She pulled on boots. She didn't pack the wedding dress. She didn't pack the jewelry Roman had given her. She left her main phone on the charger she'd need them to think she might come back, at least for the first few hours. She took the duffel bag. She took the ring off the nightstand and placed it precisely in the center of the wedding invitation on the vanity table, the one with both their names printed in silver ink, Roman Valenti and Vivian Cross, united in marriage. And she left. The housekeeper saw her go. Vivian knew that. Maria had been with Roman's household for 11 years and was loyal in the way that longtime employees of dangerous men tend to be loyal not from love, but from an understanding of what disloyalty cost. Maria would tell Roman. But Maria wouldn't tell him for at least an hour, because Maria was also smart enough to understand that being the person who reported bad news had its own risks, and she would want to be certain of what she'd seen before she said anything. An hour was enough. Vivian took a car service to Union Station, paid cash for a ticket going north, then got off 2 stops early and caught a different train going in the opposite direction. The first rule of disappearing when someone has resources: never go where you said you were going, and never go where they'd expect you to go. She had a contact in a city 3 hours away. Not a friend, exactly more of a professional acquaintance. A woman named Petra, who had spent 15 years as a paralegal for an attorney, who specialized in cases involving organized crime, before a falling out with her employer had sent her into a quieter kind of early retirement. Petra owed Vivian a favor that predated Roman by 2 years. Vivian had never collected it. She was collecting it now. While the train moved through the dark landscape between cities, Vivian sat in a window seat with her duffel bag between her feet and her burner phone in her hand, and she made decisions. Not the panicked, reactive decisions of someone who had just been blindsided. She'd had 18 months to prepare for a version of this, even if she hadn't known the exact shape it would take. These were the careful, sequential decisions of someone running a plan that had already been rehearsed, at least in her head, more times than she could count. She texted Petra a single word. The word meant, "I'm coming." It was the word they had agreed on. Then she opened a separate encrypted app and spent 40 minutes of the train ride going through what she had. The photographs of Dante's ledger, the account numbers, the shell company registrations she had tracked through public records over the course of a year, connecting names that weren't supposed to be connected. And the piece she had found 3 weeks ago, the piece she hadn't entirely known what to do with, yet the correspondence between Dante Rusk and a man named Gerald Marrow, Celeste's father. The correspondence went back 16 months. 16 months of careful coded communication that Vivian had first noticed as an anomaly in a document she shouldn't have been able to access, then traced methodically until the shape of it became clear. Dante and Gerald Marrow had an arrangement that predated Celeste's introduction to Roman by at least a year. The engagement, the switch, the humiliation. The whole choreographed replacement of Vivian with Celeste was not something Roman had decided. It was something that had been decided for him, around him, without his knowledge, by people who needed Celeste inside the Valenti organization, for reasons that had nothing to do with alliance and everything to do with acquisition. Vivian had sat on this information for 3 weeks because she hadn't known what it meant for her. Now she was starting to understand. It meant Roman was also a target. It meant the betrayal she had just witnessed wasn't only her betrayal. It meant the situation was significantly more complicated than a mafia boss trading in one fiancé for another. She stared at the window, at her own reflection in the dark glass, and thought, this is either a problem or a resource. Spent 2 years learning how to turn problems into resources. Roman Valenti discovered the ring at 10:40 that night. He had spent the hours after the meeting in the usual rhythm of a man who considers himself unreachable: phone calls, paperwork, a dinner with 2 of his captains at which Celeste's father Gerald was also present, exchanging pleasantries about the upcoming union with the smooth satisfaction of someone whose plan was proceeding. Roman had not gone to find Vivian after the meeting. It hadn't occurred to him that he needed to. In his experience, women in Vivian's position didn't leave. They got upset. They sometimes got loud. They eventually accepted the reality they were given, because the alternative, walking away from Roman Valenti's protection, his resources, his name, was worse than whatever disappointment they were processing. He had underestimated her from the beginning. He would spend a long time understanding that later. Right now, he was just standing in her room, looking at the ring, sitting in the center of the wedding invitation, and feeling something he hadn't felt in years: unease. He picked up the ring. He looked around the room, the open closet, the bare nightstand, the phone still plugged into the charger. He checked the bathroom. He checked the adjoining sitting room. He went downstairs and found Maria in the kitchen. Where is she? Maria told him what she'd seen. Woman dressed for travel, duffel bag, out the side door, approximately 9:15. Maria had thought Miss Cross was perhaps going for a walk or visiting a friend, and had not wanted to disturb anyone with speculation. Roman looked at her for a moment. You waited an hour and a half. I thought, call Dante. Dante Rusk arrived at the house within 20 minutes, because Dante lived three blocks away and Roman's calls were not optional. He was a compact man in his mid-40s, dark-haired, with the kind of face that gave nothing away, not because he felt nothing, but because he had spent a long time practicing control. He'd been with Roman since Roman was 23 years old. He knew things about Roman that Roman had never written down. He was, in the architecture of Roman's operation, the single most trusted person. He was also, though Roman didn't know this yet, Gerald Marrow's most valuable asset inside the Valenti organization. Gone, Roman said when Dante walked into the study. Dante's expression did what it always did: a slight recalibration, a brief assessment. Where? If I knew where, I wouldn't be calling you. Do you have anything with her? Cards? Phone? Phone's here. Cards she probably took. She had cash, I assume. Roman paused. She had a bag. Maria said she had a bag ready to go. Something shifted in Dante's face, briefly, and then it was gone. Vivian, who had spent 2 years watching Dante Rusk more carefully than Dante knew, would have recognized the shift. It was the expression of a man absorbing information that confirmed something he'd already suspected. But Roman wasn't looking at Dante's face. Roman was looking at the ring in his hand. Packed a bag, Roman said, mostly to himself. She had this plan. She's upset, Dante said. She found out about Celeste. She's reacting. People who are reacting don't pack bags in advance. Roman set the ring on his desk. Find her. Dante made calls. Roman poured himself a drink and stood by the window and thought, for the first time, about what Vivian Cross actually knew. He thought about where she worked, inside his operation, not officially, never officially, but she'd been present for enough dinners, enough conversations, enough of the careless background machinery of his world that she had absorbed things. He'd been careful, he thought. He'd always been careful. She was smart, but she was adjacent, not inside, and there were layers between what she might have glimpsed and what she could actually prove. He was still telling himself this when his phone rang at 12:40 in the morning, with news that one of his warehouses on the south side had been raided by federal agents. Roman stood very still for about 4 seconds after he ended that call. Then he called Dante. Dante's phone rang 7 times. Dante, who answered Roman's calls on the first ring without exception, let it ring 7 times before picking up. I just heard, Dante said. How? Scanner traffic. My guys on the south side. How did they know to go there, Dante? Tonight. Tonight of all nights. Could be a coincidence. Could be, it's not a coincidence. Roman ended the call. He stood in his study, the ring still sitting on the desk, the wedding invitation still on the vanity upstairs, with Vivian's absence printed into it as clearly as her name had been, and he started doing the math. The warehouse, the timing, the bag that had been packed in advance. He thought about Vivian's history, her father, the world she'd navigated before him. He had liked, when they first got together, that she understood his world without needing it explained. He had taken it as compatibility. Now he understood it as something else entirely. She hadn't just survived in rooms like his. She had learned those rooms. She had paid attention in a way that went beyond passive understanding. He opened his laptop and went to the secure file storage Dante maintained. The access log showed the last external access point, a device registered to Dante's own credentials 8 weeks ago. But Dante had been in Miami 8 weeks ago. Roman specifically remembered, because there had been a problem with a shipment, and Dante had handled it remotely. Remotely meant he wouldn't have physically opened those files. Remotely meant his credentials should not have generated a local access log. Roman looked at the timestamp. 11:12 in the morning, 8 weeks ago. He thought about the layout of his house, the study on the main floor, the garden visible from the study window. He thought about Dante's habits, Dante, who was meticulous about his laptop, who never left it unattended except he had taken a call in the garden once, maybe 8 weeks ago, maybe around that time, and Roman had walked through the study and noticed the laptop sitting open on the side table and hadn't thought anything about it because it was Dante's laptop in Roman's own house. Roman closed his eyes. He thought about Vivian Cross, who read faster than anyone he'd ever met, who had a memory that she kept carefully modest about, who had spent 2 years being the unassuming woman in the background of everything. Son of a bitch, he said very quietly. He wasn't angry at Vivian. He was, for the first time, genuinely afraid of what she had. By the time the second call came, this one from a captain named Foles, who was in charge of the account management side of Roman's operation. Roman was already certain. Coded ledger, maintained on a secondary device, Dante backed up remotely, had been accessed. Not stolen. Not obviously the device was still where it was supposed to be. But files had been photographed. Small details that would only matter if you were building a case. The sequential numbering, the contact codes, the account markers. When Roman said, Foles gave him a date, 8 weeks and 3 days ago. Roman hung up. He sat in the chair behind his desk and stared at the ring and thought about the woman he had planned to discard. The woman he had assumed would sit quietly in her beautiful room and wait to be told what her future looked like. She had been 11 minutes ahead of him for 8 weeks. Picked up the phone and called Dante again. This time Dante answered on the first ring. I need you in the house, Roman said. His voice was very calm. That was the voice people who knew Roman feared most, not the raised voice, not the visible anger, but the voice that had gone completely flat and controlled. Now I'm already outside, Dante said. Roman hung up. He thought, Dante is already outside, not on his way. Already there, he thought. The warehouse raid happened 90 minutes ago. Dante lives 3 blocks away, and it took him 20 minutes to arrive when Roman called him earlier. Now at 1 in the morning, he is already outside. Roman looked at the ring on his desk and had the peculiar experience of understanding, in rapid succession, 3 things that rearranged the entire landscape. First, Vivian had not left because she was hurt. Second, whoever had told the federal agents about the warehouse tonight was someone who had access to operational information in real time. Third, Dante being outside the house at 1 in the morning, already, without being called, meant Dante was expecting something to happen tonight. Roman opened his desk drawer and took out the firearm he kept there. It without thinking about it, the way you perform automatic actions when the cognitive part of your brain is fully occupied elsewhere. Dante knocked on the study door. Come in, Roman said. Dante entered. He looked the same as he always did, calm, contained, professional. He looked at Roman sitting behind the desk, at the gun now resting beside the ring, and something passed through his expression that was almost, but not quite, entirely suppressed. You know, Dante said. I'm learning, Roman said. Sit down, Dante sat. Tell me about Gerald Marrow, Roman said. The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. Vivian, if she had been there, would have counted it. She had learned that 3-second silences from Dante meant he was selecting which version of the truth to offer. He approached me 16 months ago, Dante said, finally. Roman said nothing. He let the silence do the work. He wanted access, Dante said. Not control, he said, access. A position for his daughter inside your organization, not a marriage, not at first, just proximity. A reason to be at certain meetings. He was willing to pay. And the switch, Roman said. Replacing Vivian with Celeste. That was his idea, or yours, his. He needed the marriage. He needed Celeste to be your wife, not just your girlfriend, because... Dante stopped. Because a wife has different access than a girlfriend, Roman said. Because a wife can't testify against you. Because a wife is inside the circle, not adjacent to it. Yes, and you agreed. I told you what he was offering. You told him yes, Roman said, without telling me. Dante looked at his hands. That, too, was something Vivian would have recognized. Dante. Looking at his hands meant he had run out of angles. What does Celeste actually want? Roman asked. Or what does her father want through her? The northern accounts? Dante said. And the root infrastructure. He doesn't want your territory. He wants the mechanism. He wants to run his operation through mine. Using the legitimacy I've spent 15 years building. Roman looked at the ring, and Vivian. She wasn't supposed to have anything. She was just, what did you find out she had? The silence this time was 5 seconds. I found out about the ledger access, Dante said slowly, about 3 weeks ago. I didn't know it was her until what? Until she started making moves I recognized. Roman looked at him. Moves you recognized. She's been feeding information, Dante said. Not to us. I don't know who. Roman stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, the driveway was empty except for 2 of his men stationed at the gate, and somewhere beyond the gate, the city of Chicago was continuing its operations with or without his awareness, the way cities did. She knows about you and Marrow, Roman said. It wasn't a question. If she accessed the files I think she accessed, Dante said yes. She's been sitting on it. Yes. For 3 weeks. Roman turned from the window. She sat on the biggest play she had for 3 weeks and didn't use it. Until tonight, Dante said. Roman looked at his lieutenant, at the man who had been with him for 20 years, who had stood in hospitals and courtrooms and back rooms and funerals at Roman's side, who knew everything Roman had ever done and had always, until now, kept that knowledge in service of their arrangement. Where is she? Roman said. I don't know, Dante. I genuinely don't know, Roman. She's not using her cards. She's not using her phone. She walked out of here with cash and a bag she'd packed months ago, which means she's better prepared than any of us accounted for. Roman picked up the ring from the desk. He looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something that has just revealed itself to be something other than what you thought it was. Get out, he said. Roman, get out of my house. Get away from my property. And understand that the next time I see you, we'll be having a very different conversation. Dante got up. He straightened his jacket, a gesture so practiced, it was nearly unconscious. He walked to the door. For what it's worth, Dante said, without turning around, she could have burned you 3 weeks ago. She chose not to. Roman didn't answer. Dante left. Roman stood in the study for a long time after that, the ring in his hand, the gun on the desk, the wedding invitation upstairs with its silver lettering, and the full weight of 20 years' worth of choices settling over him like weather. She could have burned you 3 weeks ago. She chose not to. He thought about why. He thought about Vivian Cross, who had grown up in rooms like his and had still, somehow, retained a kind of judgment about when to use what she had, who had discovered a conspiracy against him, the man who had just publicly humiliated her and had held on to it. Not because she was protecting him, he wasn't naive enough to think that, but because she was operating on a different timeline, with a different set of objectives, and burning Roman Valenti before she was ready was not part of the plan. He thought about the 11 minutes, the laptop, 18 months of careful, invisible work. He thought, I discarded a woman who had already decided, long before tonight, that she didn't need me to decide her fate. He thought, I had no idea. He thought, who is she going to give it to? He poured himself another drink and sat down and picked up the phone. Because there were still fires to manage, still a warehouse raid to contain, still an operation bleeding from a wound he hadn't known existed. He was Roman Valenti, and that meant the machinery kept moving regardless of what he was feeling. But the ring stayed in his hand. He didn't put it down until dawn. In a small apartment that smelled like old coffee and photocopier toner, in a city 200 miles from Chicago, Vivian Cross sat at a kitchen table across from Petra Kessler and spread out the contents of her manila envelope. Petra looked at it for a long time. She picked up each page carefully, read it, set it down. She did this without speaking, which was one of the things Vivian had always appreciated about her. Petra never performed her reactions. This is enough, Petra said finally. I know, not enough to inconvenience him. Enough to end it. I know. Petra looked at her. Why are you here instead of already having delivered this? Because, Vivian said, I don't want to deliver it wrong. I want to deliver it in a way that targets what actually needs to be targeted. Roman isn't the only problem. He might not even be the main one. Petra picked up the page containing the Marrow correspondence and read through it again. Dante Rusk and Gerald Marrow. And whoever Gerald Marrow is connected to that, I haven't found yet, because a man doesn't offer that kind of arrangement to someone like Dante Rusk without having very significant backing. You think there's another layer? There's always another layer, Vivian said. She picked up her coffee cup, found it empty, and set it back down. I've had 2 years to watch that operation, and I still think I've only seen about 60% of it. Petra set the documents down and looked at her, with the expression of someone who was both impressed and slightly alarmed. You planned all of this. I planned an exit. The rest kind of revealed itself. You have 12 hours, maybe, before Roman Valenti puts serious resources into finding you. Less, Vivian said. He already knows something's wrong. The warehouse was a message, not a main event. You tipped the warehouse? Vivian didn't answer that directly. She said, I needed him to understand the timeline. I needed him to understand that I'm not just gone, I'm active. If he thinks I'm just hiding, he'll look for me. If he thinks I'm moving, he'll think about what my next move is. Petra stared at her. That's a very dangerous gamble. Everything I've done in the last 2 years is a very dangerous gamble, Vivian said. I stopped being scared of the odds a long time ago. Outside the apartment window, the city moved through its ordinary midnight business. Somewhere 200 miles away, Roman Valenti was sitting with an empty ring in his hand, trying to calculate what he was dealing with. Somewhere in that same city, Dante Rusk was making his own calculations. And Gerald Marrow, in his own house, in his own city, was expecting a call that would confirm everything, was proceeding according to plan. None of them had planned for Vivian Cross. None of them, not one, had looked at the woman in the beautiful room with the untouched wedding dress and thought, she is the most dangerous person in this building. Vivian picked up her burner phone and opened the encrypted app. She had 3 more moves to make before she slept. She started with the first one. Petra's apartment had no curtains on the east-facing window, which meant when the sun came up, it came up hard, straight into the kitchen, straight into Vivian's face, where she had fallen asleep in the chair, with her arms folded on the table, and her head tilted at an angle that was going to make her neck ache for 2 days. She woke up before Petra did. She woke up because her body had been trained, over years of living adjacent to danger, to surface quickly from sleep, no long floating ascent, no drowsy disorientation. One moment unconscious, the next moment completely aware of where she was, what room, what situation, what the door situation was. She lifted her head, worked her jaw, and reached for the burner phone. 4 hours of sleep. She had made her 3 moves before midnight and then sat down for what she intended to be 20 minutes, and her body had simply made a different decision. The phone showed no messages, which was exactly what she'd expected. People she had contacted last night wouldn't respond through this channel. They would respond through the existence of events, the way a chess player responds to a move, not by text but by moving a piece. She stood up, rolled her neck until something in it popped, and went to the window. The city below was doing its early morning business delivery vans, a man walking a dog that didn't want to be walked, a woman in scrubs moving fast toward a bus stop. Normal, unglamorous. The kind of ordinariness that Vivian had spent 2 years being surrounded by the opposite of, and that she now found, genuinely, steadying. She heard Petra's bedroom door open. Petra appeared in the kitchen doorway already dressed, which told Vivian that Petra had also not slept much. She was a woman in her late 50s, built compact and practical with gray-streaked hair. She kept short and eyes that processed things quickly without advertising the processing. She'd survived 15 years working for a defense attorney who represented the kind of clients you didn't talk about at dinner parties, and that survival had given her a particular quality, a kind of functional calm that was not the same as peace, but was very useful. She looked at Vivian. She looked at the documents still spread on the kitchen table. Put water on. Did you sleep? Vivian said. Some. Did you? A little. Petra measured coffee into the press and said, without looking up, I made some calls last night. Vivian waited. There's a federal prosecutor named Aldane Marsh. He's been building a case, touching the edges of what you have for about 8 months. He doesn't have the interior, he has the perimeter. Shell companies, registered agents, some financial trail that keeps going cold because he can't get inside the operational structure. He needs the ledger. He needs the ledger and he needs the correspondence. Petra poured the water. And he needs someone who can explain what he's looking at. Because what you photographed is coded, and coded documents without interpretation are just documents. He needs a witness. He needs a witness, Petra confirmed. Vivian sat down. She looked at her hands. What does Marsh do with the people adjacent to what he's building? Does he burn them, or does he work with them? Depends on their value relative to the target. What's my value relative to the target? Petra set a cup of coffee in front of her and sat down across from her. I think you know the answer to that. Vivian wrapped both hands around the cup and thought about Roman. Not the Roman of last night, standing in his study with the empty ring. She hadn't been there for that, had only imagined it on the train ride over. She thought about Roman, the way she'd experienced him for 2 years, the controlled distances he kept, the way he managed people like variables in an equation, the moments of something's almost human that surfaced occasionally and then got pulled back under before they could be mistaken for vulnerability. She wasn't protecting him, but she was very aware that burning Roman Valenti, completely handing everything to Marsh, letting the full machinery of federal prosecution do what it would meant burning something that included, at its edges, people who weren't Roman, people lower down, people who had made bad decisions under difficult circumstances and who would get flattened in the avalanche without anyone asking whether flattening them served any particular purpose. She also knew that if she walked into Marsh's office with everything she had, the story became about Roman. And Roman being the story meant Dante Rusk, and Gerald Marrow became supporting characters. Means to an end. Prosecutorial stepping stones. Vivian didn't want them to be stepping stones. She wanted them to be the target. I need more time, she said. How much? Enough to establish the Marrow connection as the primary line. Right now it's buried in what I have. I need it surface level. I need Marsh looking at Marrow first and Roman second. Petra looked at her. You're trying to protect him. I'm trying to be accurate, Vivian said. Roman ran a criminal operation for 15 years. He's not innocent. But what Marrow and Dante were building, that's a different category. That's an infiltration designed to hollow him out from the inside and then use the shell of what he built to run something dirtier. If Roman goes down without that context, Marrow walks. And whatever Marrow is connected to that, I haven't found yet that walks too. Petra was quiet for a moment. You have a few days. Maybe. After that, Roman's resources are going to start closing the geography. I know. And Dante. Dante's the variable I can't fully calculate, Vivian said. He knows I have the files. He doesn't know what I plan to do with them. Which means, right now he's watching Roman, and he's watching his exit simultaneously, which limits what he can do. He could move against you directly. He doesn't know where I am. He might have resources you don't know about. He might, Vivian said. She drank her coffee. Everyone might have resources I don't know about. Been true my whole life. I'm still here. 200 miles away, Roman Valenti was on his third phone call of the morning before 7 a.m., and none of the 3 calls had told him anything useful. He'd put 4 people on finding Vivian. Not heavy resources, not yet. Not the kind of search that created noise and drew attention, but 4 disciplined men who were good at finding people who were trying not to be found. Cash trail, transit records, contacts she might have reached out to. The preliminary word was nothing. She had moved cleanly. He was sitting in the kitchen, which was not a room he usually used. He'd come down at 4 in the morning and made his own coffee and sat at the counter and stayed there because sitting in his study felt like sitting in the wreckage of something, and he wasn't ready to examine it that closely. The phone on the counter showed a message from Gerald Marrow. Read, I understand there's been some disruption. Happy to discuss resolution whenever you're ready. Roman stared at the message for a long time. Resolution. The word of a man who thought he had already won. Extending the courtesy of letting the other person realize it at their own pace. He didn't respond. He thought about Dante's words the night before. She could have burned you 3 weeks ago. She chose not to. He thought about what that meant, tactically. If Vivian had the ledger files, and he was now fairly certain she did, and she had the Marrow correspondence, and he was becoming certain of that too, then she had been sitting on the capability to end his operation for 3 weeks. She had tipped the warehouse last night not to hurt him, but to signal something. A demonstration of capability. I have this. I can use it. Watch me. She hadn't used it fully. That meant she wanted something. Question was what? Not money. She'd had access to more than enough money in his orbit and had never given any indication she was motivated by it. Not protection. She'd walked into a situation where she had no protection at all and appeared to be managing it with complete self-sufficiency. Not revenge, or not purely revenge, because pure revenge would have been the full burn, hand everything to the feds and let the dominoes fall. He turned the ring over in his fingers. He'd brought it down from the study without realizing he'd picked it up. What did she want? He thought about the past 2 years with a kind of forensic attention he hadn't applied to anything personal in a long time. He thought about specific conversations. Vivian asking once about the shell company structure, a question that had seemed like casual curiosity from someone trying to understand his world. Vivian in the background of a meeting with 3 of his captains, appearing to scroll her phone, eyes down. Vivian with Dante's laptop, he thought. I never asked her a real question. Not one. I told her things or I didn't. on the basis of what was convenient for me. I never asked her what she actually thought, what she actually wanted, what she was actually doing in the spaces I wasn't watching. That wasn't guilt, exactly. He wasn't built for guilt in a straightforward way. But it was something adjacent to it, a recognition of a specific failure of intelligence, the kind that cost operations their coherence. He had failed to gather information on his own fiancée, because he had not considered her a relevant variable. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Foles. "Tell me something useful," Roman said. "There's a name coming up in connection with the warehouse raid," Foles said. "Someone at the federal level who's been circling this territory for months. Prosecutor named Marsh." Roman knew the name. He'd known it peripherally, the way you know about weather systems forming in distant states relevant in theory, not yet immediate. "He circled our territory before," Roman said. "He's not circling anymore," Foles said. "Word is he got something last night that moved him from preliminary to active. Pulling records this morning." Roman set the ring flat on the counter. "What kind of records? Financial? Shell company registrations? The kind of thing you'd pull if you suddenly had an interior roadmap." Roman closed his eyes. "All right. What do you want to do?" "Nothing yet." "Watch it." He hung up. She had given Marsh something last night. Not everything, she hadn't given everything, because the raid on the warehouse was targeted and contained, not a comprehensive exposure. She had given him a thread, enough to pull, not enough to unravel. He was managing the pace. He picked up the ring again, turned it over, and thought, "She is smarter than everyone in this situation. She is smarter than me, smarter than Dante, and she is making decisions on a timeline none of us can see." He needed to find her, not to stop her. He was increasingly uncertain about that objective. He needed to find her, because he needed to understand what she was actually doing, and the only way to understand that was to talk to her, which was not a thing he had ever particularly prized before, and was now 6:55 in the morning in his own kitchen, the thing he wanted most in the world. Dante Rusk drove for 40 minutes before he pulled into the parking structure on Wacker and stopped the cars and sat. He needed to think, and he needed to think somewhere that was not his apartment and not Roman's house. The parking structure was neutral. 6 levels of concrete and fluorescent light and the sound of other people's engines. He had been with Roman Valenti for 22 years. He said that to himself now, not as a defense, but as a fact he needed to examine. 22 years. Since Roman was 23 and Dante was 25, and they had been, functionally, building something together, even if the something had always been Roman's name on the outside and Dante's competence on the inside. Gerald Marrow had come to him 16 months ago at a dinner that Dante had attended alone. Because Roman had been in New York and Marrow had been deliberately positioned across the table, the conversation had started as the usual ambient networking of that world and had become something else gradually. Over 3 hours and 2 bottles of wine, something Dante had not entirely recognized as a seduction until it was already completed. The offer had been simple in structure and complex in implication. Marrow wanted access to the Valenti operation. Not to destroy it, not to take it over. He'd been very specific about that, and Dante had believed him, which was either naive or pragmatic, depending on how you looked at it. He wanted a channel, a relationship. Celeste positioned inside through marriage, which would give Marrow a legitimate claim to certain meetings, certain conversations, certain decisions. In exchange, Dante would receive what he had not received in 22 years of being the man behind the man: recognition, equity. A formalized piece of what he had spent 2 decades building, negotiated through Marrow's special legitimacy, rather than Roman's professional assumption that Dante's loyalty was self-sustaining. He had told himself it was a business decision. He had told himself Roman would never have to know, because the arrangement would simply shape things from the background, the way all the best arrangements did. He had not anticipated Vivian Cross. He should have. That was the thing he kept coming back to, sitting in the parking structure in the gray morning light. He should have taken her more seriously. He had watched her for 2 years with the detached assessment he applied to everyone in Roman's orbit, and he had consistently filed her as intelligent, observant, contained, probably a low-level strategic thinker but not a player. She was in that world by proximity, not by choice. She was managing her situation, not running one. 11 minutes. He had been gone from the study for 11 minutes. And in those 11 minutes, she had accessed files it had taken Dante 3 months to organize, had apparently extracted what she needed, and had then spent 8 weeks making no visible move that would signal she had done anything at all. She had been in his blind spot by design, and she had used that blind spot with a precision that he now, sitting in the concrete dark, found genuinely unsettling. Phone buzzed. A message from a number he recognized as a Marrow relay. Status. One word. Gerald Marrow, wanting to know whether the situation was proceeding or decomposing. Dante looked at the word for a moment. Then he typed, complicated. The response came back in under a minute. Simplify it. Dante put the phone in his breast pocket and thought about what that meant coming from a man like Marrow. Simplify it was not a request. It was a direction. And the direction, in the context of what Marrow had at stake, Celeste positioning, the access he'd spent 16 months engineering meant remove the complication. The complication had a name. Dante started the car. He drove for a while without a destination because he needed to keep moving while he decided something that would determine the shape of everything that came after. He had spent 22 years being the man who made Roman's decisions manageable. He had handled problems. He had translated Roman's instincts into operational actions. He had been, in every practical sense, the reason the Valenti organization ran as smoothly as it did. He was very good at removing complications. The question was whether he was willing to remove this one. He thought about Vivian's face the last time he'd seen her. 2 days ago, at a dinner where she had sat across from Celeste and maintained the expression of a woman who was processing something privately and revealing none of it. He'd watched her that night with the new alertness, because by that point he'd known about the ledger access and was trying to determine how much she had. She'd been perfectly ordinary. She'd eaten her dinner and made appropriate conversation and given him absolutely nothing. That was the face of someone who had already decided. Phone rang. Not the Marrow relay, his regular phone. Roman's name on the screen, he answered. Where are you? Roman said. Driving, Dante said. Come to the house. We said everything that needed saying last night. I have questions that weren't on the table last night, Roman said. His voice was the flat one. Come to the house, Dante. I'm not asking. The line between them was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of two people who have known each other long enough to communicate a great deal in silence. Give me an hour, Dante said. Roman hung up. Dante kept driving. He thought about Marrow's message. Simplify it. He thought about Vivian, somewhere in a city he couldn't locate, managing a timeline no one else could see. He thought about 22 years. Then he thought about the thing he had not let himself think about directly. Until now, Marrow's endgame was not a channel. It was never a channel. A man with Marrow's resources and appetite did not spend 16 months and significant capital engineering access to an operation just to run goods through it, buying the operation. He was buying it by installing his daughter at the center of it, and then, when the timing was right, ensuring that Roman Valenti was no longer in a position to object. Dante had told himself it was a business arrangement. He had not let himself look at what Marrow was actually building, because looking at it clearly would have meant confronting what he had agreed to facilitate. He had agreed to facilitate the destruction of the man he had spent 22 years working beside. He pulled the car over on a side street and sat with his hands on the wheel and breathed. Outside, a group of kids in school uniforms moved down the sidewalk in a loose, noisy cluster, pushing each other, laughing at something. Ordinary. The world just doing its thing. He took out the Marrow relay phone and looked at Simplify It again. Then he took out his regular phone and opened a contact he had not used in 4 months. A name that appeared in his contacts, simply Asm, which stood for Marsh. Because Dante Rusk, in the 18 months since Gerald Marrow had come to him at that dinner, had also been doing something Marrow didn't know about. He had been talking to a federal prosecutor, not giving him anything useful, nothing operational, nothing that would move a case forward. Talking. Maintaining a line. The way a man who is not certain where he's going keeps one foot touching solid ground. He looked at the contact for a long time. Then he put the phone away without calling. He wasn't ready. He didn't know if he would ever be ready. And readiness might not end up being his to determine, because Vivian Cross was already in motion, and whatever she was building was going to arrive at a conclusion whether Dante was ready for it or not. He put the car in drive and headed toward Roman's house. Roman was waiting in the kitchen. Not the study, the kitchen, which Dante registered immediately as a shift. The study was Roman's operational ground. The kitchen was where Roman went when he was thinking rather than deciding. He looked exhausted, not the kind of exhaustion that came from one bad night, but the accumulated kind that had been building for a while and had finally surfaced through the cracks. He looked at Dante with an expression that wasn't anger anymore. It was something more complicated, and for that reason, harder to manage. "Sit down," Roman said. Dante sat. "I've been thinking about something since 4 this morning," Roman said. He poured coffee, pushed a cup across the counter without asking. Vivian didn't give Marsh the full package. She gave him a thread. "Yes. Why?" "You know why," Dante said. "I want to hear your version." Dante wrapped his hands around the cup. "She's managing the direction of the exposure. She wants Marrow to be the primary target, which means she needs to keep what she has organized around that narrative, rather than handing it over as raw material." Roman looked at him. "She's trying to protect me. She's trying to be precise," Dante said. "That's not the same thing. Don't flatter yourself." Something shifted in Roman's jaw, a brief acknowledgement that Dante was right. "Marrow sent me a message this morning," Dante said. Roman's eyes came up. One word. "He wants me to simplify the situation." "He means Vivian." "Yes." Roman set his cup down on the counter with a sound that was controlled but not entirely. "He wants you to." He didn't say it explicitly. Men like Marrow don't say things explicitly. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him it was complicated." Roman looked at the counter for a moment. Then he looked at Dante with the kind of directness that had for 22 years been the thing that made working with him both difficult and clarifying. "If he moves on her, he has people I don't control," Dante said. "He has resources that don't run through me. If he decides to move directly, I can't guarantee I know about it in time to—" He stopped. "To what?" "To do anything about it." The kitchen was very quiet. Roman said, "You should have told me about Marrow 16 months ago." "Yes, you should have told me the day he approached you." "Yes. Why didn't you?" Dante looked at him. He thought about the true answer, which was, "Because I was tired of being invisible. Because I wanted something that was actually mine. Because after 22 years of making your operation function, I wanted someone to put my name on something." He said, "Because I was stupid." Roman looked at him for a long time. "Is that the whole answer?" "No. But it's the part that matters right now." Roman picked up the ring from the counter. He'd been carrying it around. All morning, Dante noticed the way people carry things when they're thinking, and turned it over. "I need to find her," Roman said, "before Marrow does. I've been trying. She's clean. She moved like someone who knew she'd be looked for. She did know. She's known everything about this situation longer than we have." Roman set the ring down again. "Think about who she might have contacted. Not friends. She doesn't have friends the way people mean that. Think about professional relationships. People she trusted before me." Dante ran through what he knew about Vivian's history. Her father's connections, the world she'd come from, people who would be positioned to help someone in her situation, someone who needed discretion, access to certain channels, legal or quasi-legal cover. "There was a woman," Dante said slowly, "before you. She worked," and he stopped. "What?" "Defense law. Adjacent to the kind of practice that touches this world. She and Vivian had some kind of relationship. I looked into Vivian's background when you first brought her in. Standard procedure. And this name came up once, and then didn't come up again. Petra something. Kessler. She'd dropped out of practice about 18 months ago." Roman looked at him. "You had this in your file. It was a peripheral note. I didn't think—"
"Where is she?"
Dante pulled out his phone and accessed the background file he kept on relevant contacts. He found the name, found the last known address, the one from 18 months ago, before Kessler had gone quiet. He read Roman the city. Roman looked at the ring. "Get the car," he said. "Roman, I'm not sending people. I'm going myself." He looked at Dante with an expression that settled something. "And you're coming with me, because right now I need you where I can see you. And because if Marrow has people moving, your presence in this city is a liability for everyone." Dante understood the subtext. "Come because I'm not done with you. Because this conversation isn't finished. Because I don't trust you out of my sight. And going together is the only arrangement that serves both of us right now." "All right," Dante said. "We leave in 20 minutes. Dante stood up. He felt the weight of the Marrow relay phone in his breast pocket and thought about the message sitting in it. Simplify it. He thought about what Marrow would do when Dante didn't respond with an action. He thought about Vivian in a city 200 miles away, making her next move on a timeline that was closing faster than she knew. He thought about Marsh's number in his regular phone. Contact he hadn't called. He went to get the car. Vivian found the gap at 11:15 that morning, sitting at Petra's kitchen table with Petra's laptop and 3 hours of focused work behind her. It wasn't in the Marrow correspondence. It wasn't in the ledger. It was in a registration document for one of the shell companies, a document she had photographed but not yet fully processed, a subsidiary registration that connected a company name she recognized from Dante's files to a holding entity she didn't recognize at all. She ran the holding entity through public records. The holding entity connected to a political action committee. The political action committee had 3 board members, 2 of whom were names she didn't know. The third was a name she knew very well. She sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Petra, she said. Petra came out of the other room. Tell me everything you know about a man named Senator Carl Dredge. Petra went very still. Why, she said. Because he's connected to Marrow's holding structure. And if that's true, then what Marrow is building isn't a criminal operation. It's a political one. He's not trying to take over Roman's empire. She looked at Petra, trying to launder influence through it. He needs a criminal operation sophisticated, enough to move money and connect people across jurisdictions without generating paper that ties back to Dredge. Petra sat down across from her. Her face had done the thing where it went very careful and very still simultaneously. Dredge is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, Petra said quietly. Vivian looked at her. He has oversight of federal prosecutorial appointments, Petra said, which means he has not direct control, but significant influence over which cases get prioritized, and which prosecutors get resources, and which investigations get. Quietly ended, Vivian said. They looked at each other. If Marsh is building a case, Vivian said, and Dredge is connected to what Marsh is building toward, then Marsh doesn't know what he's walking into, Petra said, or the case gets ended before it gets anywhere meaningful. Vivian. Petra put both hands flat on the table. This is a different category of problem. This is not a mafia operation. This is I know what it is, Vivian said. You can't manage this the way you've been managing Dante and Marrow. This is I know. Vivian looked at the laptop screen. The holding entity. The PAC. The center's name sitting in public records, like it was ordinary information. Which it was. Technically everything she'd found was technically public, just distributed across enough different filings that no one had assembled it into a single picture before. I know what this is. Her burner phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. A message from one of the contacts she'd reached out to, the night before, not through a name she'd use out loud, just through a channel she'd maintained for 2 years against exactly this kind of moment. The message read, "They're moving. 2 of them, headed your direction. Estimate 4 to 5 hours." She read it twice. Then she set the phone on the table and looked at Petra and said, "How long have you been at this address?" Petra understood immediately. 14 months. Is it clean? Far as I know. As far as you know, Vivian repeated. She thought about Dante. She thought about the background files she knew he maintained on people in Roman's orbit, the files she had looked at once, briefly, using credentials she wasn't supposed to have, and in which she had seen her own entry surprisingly sparse, she'd thought at the time, and 1 or 2 other names. She thought about whether her name had been connected to Petra's. She thought 4 to 5 hours, which meant they'd left Chicago this morning, which meant they knew the city, if not the address, which meant Dante had found something. She closed the laptop and looked at Petra. "We need to move," she said. "Where?" Vivian picked up the phone and the documents and thought about the senator's name on the screen and the holding company and the 16 months of careful engineering that Gerald Marrow had done and what it all added up to, what it meant for Marsh's case, what it meant for Roman, what it meant for anyone who thought they were playing a contained game and had not yet understood the actual size of the board. "I need to talk to Marsh directly," she said. Petra stared at her. "You walk into a federal prosecutor's office. You're not walking out as a free agent. You become an asset. They manage you. They manage what you know and how it gets used and when." "I know, that's not a negotiation, Vivian. That's a surrender." "No," Vivian said, picking up her duffel bag. "A surrender is when you have no leverage. I have everything they need to make a case that goes 3 levels deeper than anything Marsh has been building. That's not a surrender." She looked at Petra steadily. "That's a negotiation from the strongest position in the room." She slung the bag over her shoulder, picked up the manila envelope and the laptop, and walked to the door. Her hand was on the doorknob when Petra said, "Vivian, Dredge is connected to this. If a sitting senator is in Marrow's structure, you understand what you're pointing at." Vivian opened the door. "Yes," she said. "And you're still going." "There's no version of this," Vivian said, "where I put this down and walk away clean. There hasn't been since the moment I looked at that ledger." She looked back at Petra. "The only question was always where I point it." She walked out. The door closed behind her. Outside, the city moved around her, indifferent and continuous. And somewhere on a highway 4 hours behind her, Roman Valenti was coming. And she had exactly enough time to get to Aldane Marsh's office before the last door she had left open closed permanently behind her. The federal building on West Madison had a security checkpoint at the entrance that took 4 minutes to clear. And Vivian spent those 4 minutes standing in line behind a man with a briefcase and a woman arguing quietly into her phone, feeling every second of it against her skin like something physical. She had taken a cab from Petra's building to a coffee shop 6 blocks from the federal building, sat for 20 minutes to make sure no one had followed the cab, then walked the 6 blocks at the pace of someone with somewhere ordinary to be. The manila envelope was inside her jacket, folded once, which made it slightly awkward, but kept it out of visible contact with the duffel bag she had checked into a locker at a parking garage 3 blocks back. She was not going to walk into a federal prosecutor's office, carrying a bag packed for running. She cleared security at 11:47 in the morning. The receptionist at Marsh's office was a young man with rectangular glasses who looked at her with the polite skepticism of someone trained to manage unscheduled visitors. Vivian told him she didn't have an appointment. She told him her name. She told him she had material directly relevant to an active investigation, and that the investigation in question involved a case Marsh had been building for 8 months, and that he would want to see her today and not tomorrow. The young man asked her to wait. She sat in a chair against the wall and looked at her hands and breathed. The office was the kind of government space that had been efficiently functional for decades. Carpet the color of old oatmeal, lighting that flattened everything, the ambient sound of a building full of people doing procedural work. Nothing about it was designed to make visitors comfortable. She suspected that was intentional. 8 minutes passed. Then a door opened and a man came through it who was not what she had expected. She had constructed a version of Aldane Marsh in her head, from the peripheral things she'd heard about him, the cases he'd taken, the way he worked, the reputation that had filtered through the networks she'd been paying attention to for 2 years. She had expected someone angular and prosecutorial, someone who wore ambition on his face like a second jaw. Marsh was in his late 40s, medium height, with the kind of build that suggested he had once been athletic and had transitioned into something more sustainable. His face was tired in a specific way, not the tired of a bad night, but the tired of a long project that had been stalling and that he had been carrying for too long. He looked at her with careful, undramatic attention. "Miss Cross," he said, "Mr. Marsh, come in." She followed him through the door into a conference room that was slightly more human than the waiting area, a long table, windows that looked out onto a view of other buildings, a whiteboard with something half erased on it. He closed the door. He didn't offer coffee. He sat at the table and looked at her with his hands flat on the surface, and she sat across from him and put the manila envelope on the table between them. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. "Before you open that," Vivian said, "I need to know something." "All right. What do you know about Senator Carl Dregg's connection to Gerald Marrow?" The quality of Marsh's stillness changed. It was a very small change, a slight increase in the deliberateness of his breathing, a fractional adjustment of his weight, but Vivian had spent 2 years reading rooms, and she caught it. "Why don't you tell me what you know?" Marsh said. "Because I need to understand what I'm walking into before I give you anything. If Dreggy is in your awareness and you're already working around him, that's one situation. If Dreggy is not in your awareness, that's a different situation, and it has implications for how safe this conversation is." Marsh looked at her for a long moment. "You're concerned about the security of this office." "I'm concerned about the security of whatever I give you." "Yes. Miss Cross, this is a federal— Dregg sits on judiciary," Vivian said. "He has influence over prosecutorial resources and case prioritization. If he's connected to what I have in that envelope, which I believe he is, then the question of whether this case gets built or quietly buried is not purely about the evidence. It's about whether someone with access to the mechanisms of this office has reason to bury it." She held his gaze. "So I need to know where you are on Dregg before I hand you anything." The silence in the room had a particular texture. Outside the windows, a cloud moved across the light. Marsh picked up a pen from the table and turned it over in his fingers. He said, "Dregg came up as a peripheral note in our financial analysis approximately 3 months ago. We flagged it, and we've been unable to confirm the connection through any avenue available to us." "It's in the public record," Vivian said, "distributed across 4 different jurisdictions and 11 filing categories, which is why no one has connected it. You connected it." I had time and motivation. Marsh looked at the envelope. What else is in there? Ledger files from the Valenti operation, photographed in original format with sequential context. Shell company registration chains connecting Valenti entities to Marrow holding structures. 18 months of correspondence between Dante Rusk and Gerald Marrow, documenting the arrangement to position Celeste Marrow inside the Valenti organization, and the holding entity registration that connects Marrow to the pack that connects to Dreg. She let that sit for a moment. It's not everything, but it's enough to move from preliminary to active on 3 separate targets simultaneously. Marsh put the pen down. If I open that envelope, he said, you become part of this case. You understand that. I understand that. That means you don't go home. That means you don't make decisions about what gets used and when. That means, I know what it means, Vivian said. I've been managing this alone for 3 weeks. I'd like to not be alone anymore. Something in Marsh's face shifted, not softness exactly, but a recognition of something. He reached across the table and pulled the envelope toward him. He opened it. Vivian watched him read. She had watched a lot of people read things in her life. She had learned that the way a person reads tells you almost as much as what they say afterward. Marsh read carefully and completely. He didn't skim, didn't jump ahead, didn't look up to ask clarifying questions while he was mid-page. He turned each page only when he was finished with it, and he set each page face down in a separate stack from the one he hadn't read yet. It took him 31 minutes. She sat. She didn't look at her phone. She didn't look at the window. She let him read. When he finished, he put the last page on the face-down stack and looked at the ceiling for a moment, which told her everything she needed to know about what he thought of the material. The Dreg connection, he said. Walk me through how you found it. She walked him through it. The subsidiary registration, the holding entity, the pack, the board composition, the third name. He listened with the pen in his hand again, not taking notes, just turning it over. PAC made 3 contributions to Dreggy's campaign in the last election cycle, she said. Those are public record. What's not assembled anywhere is that the PAC's operating account receives transfers from the Marrow holding entity on a quarterly basis. The transfers are structured as consulting fees. The consulting relationship is documented in a filing I found in the Delaware Corporate Registry. 12 pages of standard contract language, with 1 paragraph on page 9 that specifies the nature of services, which is written in language general enough to mean nothing until you read it alongside the holding entity's stated purpose, which is political facilitation. She said it plainly, the actual phrase. Political facilitation. Marsh put the pen down again. Marrow isn't building a criminal operation, Vivian said. He's building a mechanism that requires criminal infrastructure, the routing, the accounts, the jurisdictional complexity, but the product he's selling is political access. He needs Valenti's structure because it can move money and people and information across lines that legitimate operations can't cross. And because if any part of it gets exposed, it looks like organized crime rather than political corruption. She looked at Marsh steadily. Dredge is the client. Marrow is the architect. Roman Valenti's organization was going to be the vehicle. Was going to be, Marsh said. Celeste Marrow as Roman's wife gives Gerald Marrow standing inside the Valenti operation. A year, 18 months of Celeste in that position, and Marrow would have enough leverage over Roman to redirect the operation's infrastructure without Roman being able to object, or without Roman being present to object. Marsh looked at her. You think Marrow planned to remove Valenti? I think Marrow planned to make Valenti unnecessary, Vivian said, which in that world has a practical meaning. The room was very quiet. I need you to stay in this building for the next several hours, Marsh said. I understand. I need to make calls that can't be made from this room. I understand. He stood up, gathering the pages carefully. He paused at the door and looked back at her. You've been carrying this alone for 3 weeks. Yes. Why did you wait? She thought about answering that honestly. She thought about Roman's ring on the wedding invitation and the way she had stood in her room that night, making decisions with a clarity that should have felt cold and had instead felt like the first completely real moment she'd had in 2 years. I was making sure I was pointing it at the right thing, she said. Marsh nodded. He left. The door closed. Vivian sat alone in the conference room and looked at the half-erased whiteboard and thought about the next few hours and what they would mean and what would not be recoverable after them. Her phone, the burner, buzzed. She looked at the screen. The message was from the same channel as before. Change of information. Not 2. 3. Third one is not Valenti. She read it twice. 3. Not 2. A third person moving toward her location who was not Roman. She thought about Marrow's message to Dante. Simplify it. She thought about whether Dante had passed her location to Marrow. She thought about whether that was possible. Dante, knowing where she was before Roman did, and choosing which direction to deliver that information. She thought about the look on Dante's face the night he had found the ledger access in the logs and had spent 3 weeks not telling Roman what he suspected. She thought Dante has been playing both sides. I knew that. What I didn't calculate was which side he would choose when the pressure came. She was about to stand up and go find Marsh when the conference room door opened. It was not Marsh. It was a man she had never seen before, early 40s, tall, wearing the kind of suit that cost more than it announced. He had a visitor badge clipped to his lapel and the composed, slightly blank expression of someone who operated in official spaces, frequently enough that the expression was a practice default. Closed the door behind him. "Miss Cross," he said. Vivian didn't move. "Who are you?" "My name is Fiancé. I work for Senator Dregg's office." The room seemed to reorganize itself around her. She sat very still and felt her pulse in her fingertips and thought, of course. The receptionist. The 8-minute wait. Someone in this building, or adjacent to it, who monitored incoming visitors to Marsh's office against a watch list. Because a senator with oversight of prosecutorial appointments and something to protect would maintain exactly that kind of monitoring, would have exactly that kind of arrangement in place. Quiet and unremarkable, and devastating in its implications. Her name was on the watch list. "How long have I been on your radar?" she said. "A few weeks," Foss said. He sat down at the table not across from her, but at the end, a neutral position that was not confrontational in its geometry, but that blocked the clearest path to the door. "Since you began making inquiries through certain channels." The channels were encrypted. Most things are encrypted until someone upstream has the key. Vivian looked at him and thought about the material she had just handed Marsh. The material that was now somewhere in this building, in Marsh's hands, and that she could not retrieve. "Where is Marsh?" she said. "Mr. Marsh is currently in a conversation with his supervisor that will take some time." Foss folded his hands on the table. "The senator has no interest in escalating this situation. He's aware that you've accumulated significant material. He's also aware that material's value depends entirely on context and on the credibility of the person presenting it." He paused. "A woman who was engaged to a known organized crime figure, who disappeared under suspicious circumstances the night before her wedding, who is currently operating on the basis of documents obtained through unauthorized access to private systems. The credibility question is a real one." Vivian said nothing. "The senator would like to offer an alternative to the path you're currently on," Fossey said. "The material you've gathered, understood correctly, doesn't implicate the senator in anything criminal. What it shows is a legal contribution structure and a consulting arrangement that will look, with the right framing, exactly like what it is documented, to be legitimate political fundraising. The Marrow connection is a problem for Marrow, not for Senator Dregg. You're here to offer me a way out," Vivian said. "I'm here to suggest that the case you think you're building is significantly more complicated than you understand. Tell me something I don't already know." Fossey looked at her with an expression that shifted slightly, a recalibration, a reassessment of what he was dealing with. "The ledger material you gave Marsh targets the Valenti operation, Marsh's case. The Marrow correspondence targets Gerald Marrow, which is a separate matter. But the holding entity and the PAC filing, those are the problem," Vivian said. "Dregg. Those are documents that can be contextualized." "They can be contextualized," Vivian agreed, "if no one is presenting them as part of a connected chain. Marsh builds the Valenti case, and the Valenti case connects to Marrow, and Marrow connects to the PAC, and someone is standing in a room explaining the chain." She looked at him. "Then the context writes itself." Fossey was quiet for a moment. "You're the someone," he said. "I was the someone," Vivian said. "I gave Marsh the material 30 minutes ago. Marsh's ability to use that material depends on a number of institutional factors," Fossey said. "Factors that the senator has some influence over." "I know. That's why I'm not relying only on Marsh." Something moved in Fossey's composed expression. "What does that mean?" Vivian said nothing. She had spent the 8-minute wait in the reception area doing one thing on the burner phone. Not a message. A transfer copy of the photographs, the correspondence, and the holding entity chain to 3 separate encrypted repositories with 3 separate contacts who did not know about each other and who had instructions to act on the material at a specific time if they did not receive a specific countermand from her. A dead man's switch. She had built it 2 days ago, when she had decided that walking into any official space with a single copy of critical material was the kind of mistake that got people quietly managed out of situations. It means, Vivian said, that what I gave Marsh is already somewhere else, multiple somewhere elses, and that the timeline on those somewhere elses is not in my control to extend by very much. The room was very quiet. Fosse's composure held, but she could see the effort it was taking. He had come in here with a clear task: assess the situation, offer the off-ramp, secure the material's contextualization, and the situation had just revealed itself to be different than his briefing had described. I'd like to speak with Senator Dregg directly, Vivian said. I know it's not how this works. I'm not asking for a meeting through proper channels. I'm telling you to make a call right now and put him on the phone, because the next 30 minutes of his life are going to go very differently depending on whether he understands what I've done and what I'm prepared to do. She held Fosse's eyes. The call takes 5 minutes. If he'd rather skip the call and manage the consequences, that's a choice he can make. But I'd like him to make it with full information. Fosse looked at her for a long moment. Then he took out his phone. Call took 4 minutes and 18 seconds. Vivian did not speak much. She said 3 sentences to the voice on the other end of Fosse's phone, held for 20 seconds, then said 2 more sentences. And then she said, I'm not asking you to do anything right now. I'm asking you to understand that the situation has already moved past the point where doing something to me changes it. So the question is not about me. The question is about what you do with what's already in motion. She handed the phone back to Fosse. Fosse listened, said nothing, ended the call. He sat at the table, looking at the surface for a moment. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame and looked back at her, with the expression of a man who was recalibrating the entire day and not finding the recalibration comfortable. You understand, he said, that this doesn't end cleanly. Nothing in my life has ever ended cleanly, Vivian said. I've been fine. He left. The door stayed open this time. Vivian sat in the empty conference room and breathed. She put both hands flat on the table and felt the solidity of it and breathed for about 30 seconds deliberately because her body needed it even if her mind was still moving. Then Marsh came back through the door. He looked different than he had when he left. He looked like a man who had just been told something that restructured everything he thought he knew about the last 8 months of his work. He looked like he hadn't completely finished processing it and was operating on the portion he'd absorbed. He sat down. Your name came up on a monitoring protocol I didn't know existed in this office, he said. I know. Someone in Dregg's orbit has been watching the visitor logs for this floor. I know. I assumed something like that was possible, which is why I created redundancies before I came in. She looked at him. Are you going to be able to work this case? Marsh looked at the table. That question is more complicated than it was this morning. Can you work it? He looked up. Yes, but not from this office. Not in the usual way. He paused. I'm going to need to make arrangements that take a few days. I may not have a few days, Vivian said. Marrow has people moving. They know the city I'm in. They know you came here? They will. If Dregg's people know, Marrow's people will know shortly after. That's how connected structures work. Information moves along the edges. She looked at him steadily. I need somewhere to be that isn't this building and isn't anywhere associated with me. Marsh was quiet for a moment, thinking. She could see him working through the operational implications, the jurisdictional questions, the personal risk calculus. I have a colleague, he said finally, outside this office. Someone I trust outside the normal chain. Someone who's been building a parallel track on political corruption cases for 18 months, Marsh said. Someone who will look at the Dregg material and understand immediately what it is. He looked at her. She's not in Chicago. She's not in this jurisdiction. She's been operating specifically outside the structural influence that Dregg has, Vivian said. Her name is Calloway. She's good. Is she expecting a call? No, but she'll take mine. Marsh stood up. I'm going to make the call from somewhere other than this building. You're going to stay here until I come back, and then I'm going to move you somewhere. The monitoring protocols in this building don't reach. He picked up her manila envelope and held it flat against his chest. You did the right thing coming here, he said. I'm not sure yet, Vivian said. He went to the door. Marsh, she said. he stopped. Dante Rusk has been in contact with someone in your office, she said. I don't know who, but he's been maintaining a line for months. When you figure out who, handle it carefully, because Dante is a variable I haven't been able to fully calculate, and whether he's an asset or a liability in the next 72 hours depends on which way he falls. Marsh looked at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. How do you know about Ruck's contact? He said. Because Vivian said I know Dante. And I know that a man who spent 22 years being the most important person in the room who never got credited for it keeps exits the way other people keep money. Multiple different directions, different values. She looked at him. He's been hedging since before Marrow approached him. He's just never been forced to choose a direction. And now? Now Roman is 4 hours from this city. Marrow's people are moving, and Dante is in a car between the two of them, which means he has to choose today whether he wants to. She paused. If you can get to him before the choice gets made for him, he's the most valuable person in this whole situation. He was inside everything for 22 years. He knows things that are in no document anywhere. Marsh absorbed that. I'll be back in 90 minutes, he said. The door closed. Fian sat in the conference room alone and looked at the half-erased whiteboard and thought about the dead man's switch on the burner phone, and what happened when 90 minutes became 2 hours, and whether the contacts at the other end of those. Encrypted repositories would hold their timelines or get nervous and act early. She thought about Petra, who was somewhere in the city, hopefully already moving. She thought about Roman, 4 hours away on a highway, coming toward her with Dante in the car beside him, and what Roman's face would look like when he understood the full dimension of what had been built around him without his knowledge. She thought about the wedding dress in its protective sleeve, still hanging in Roman's house, still waiting for a woman who was not coming back. She thought everything I built in 2 years was an exit. What I'm building now is something different. She didn't have a word for it yet. She sat very still in the fluorescent light and waited. And outside the windows, the city went on doing what cities do, indifferent to the specific shape of one woman's reckoning. And somewhere in the building's monitoring logs, her name sat in a field it was never supposed to reach. And the clock moved, and the morning finished itself without asking anyone's permission, and Vivian Cross, who had learned at 19 years old to count exits before she counted anything else, sat in a room with one door and no window she could reach and felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, something she almost couldn't identify because she had gone so long without it. Still not safe, not finished, not anywhere near the end of this. Still, like the moment between a wave breaking and the water pulling back. It lasted about 4 minutes. Then the burner phone buzzed again, and she looked at the screen, and the message said, Rusk separated from Valenti. Unknown direction. Valenti continuing toward you alone. And then, 30 seconds later, a second message from a different contact, one she had not heard from in 3 weeks, one she had not expected to hear from, one whose channel she had almost deactivated because she had assumed it was dormant. The message from that contact read, Celeste Marrow is in the federal building. She came in through the lower entrance 40 minutes ago. She asked for Marsh by name. Vivian stared at the screen. Celeste Marrow was in this building. Had been in this building for 40 minutes, before Vivian had arrived. She thought about the timeline. She thought about Fosse and the monitoring protocol and the visitor logs. She thought about who had sent Fosse, whether Fosse had been sent in response to Vivian's arrival, or whether Fosse had already been in this building for a different reason, managing a different situation, and had pivoted to Vivian only when her name hit the log. She thought about Celeste Marrow, who was not just Gerald Marrow's daughter and Roman's intended bride, but a person who had agreed to be the instrument of a plan that required her to marry a man as a strategic mechanism, and who had been doing that for 16 months, with her own private calculation running underneath it. She thought, what does Celeste want that Celeste hasn't told her father? She thought, if Celeste came to Marsh independently, before me, then Celeste has her own material. She thought, or Celeste came to Marsh because someone told her to come to Marsh, and that someone was managing Celeste, the way Marrow managed everything as an instrument, not a person, to be positioned where useful and discarded when done. She thought Celeste might not know she's being managed. She thought her Celeste knows exactly and is trying to get out the same way I am. She stood up from the table. She went to the door and opened it and looked at the receptionist with the rectangular glasses, who looked back at her with polite alarm and said, I need you to take me to wherever Marsh put the other visitor who came in through the lower entrance this morning. Young man blinked. I don't tell him it's about Celeste Marrow, Vivian said. She said it with the specific flatness of someone who has just run out of time for gradual approaches, who has just understood that the plan she had been executing for 3 weeks had collided with a variable she had not accounted for, and that the collision was going to require her to do something she had not planned and had not rehearsed and had no margin to get wrong. The receptionist with the rectangular glasses made one call and then walked Vivian down a corridor. She hadn't seen on the way in a back hallway that smelled like toner and old carpet, with doors on both sides that were uniformly closed. He stopped at the third door on the left and knocked twice, opened it without waiting for an answer, and then stepped back to let Vivian through. The room was smaller than the conference room. A table, 4 chairs, a window that looked onto a ventilation shaft. 2 cups of coffee on the table, one untouched, one half finished. Celeste Marrow was sitting in the chair closest to the window. Vivian had seen her twice before, once at a distance, at a charity event Roman had attended 8 months ago, and once close up, 2 nights ago, across the dinner table, with Roman's hand on her wrist, and Vivian's entire future being quietly detonated in the background. Both times she had catalogued her with the careful attention she applied to everything in Roman's orbit. Late 20s, composed in the expensive and slightly rigid way of someone raised to be composed, with dark hair and the particular posture of a woman who had been told since childhood that how she held herself communicated something important. What Vivian had not expected was the expression on her face right now. Not the composed dinner table version, not the performance. Something much more stripped down than that, a face that had been running on adrenaline and bad sleep for longer than the last 24 hours, that had been running on it for weeks maybe, and that had arrived in this room and partially let go of the performance, because there was no one left to perform for. Celeste looked at Vivian and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You're faster than I thought you'd be." Vivian sat down across from her. "How long have you been trying to get out?" Something moved in Celeste's face. "How did you?" "Because you came here before you knew I was coming, which means you came here on your own, for your own reasons, which means this isn't your father's move." Vivian looked at her steadily. "How long?" Celeste wrapped both hands around the half-finished coffee cup. Her knuckles were slightly white. 4 months, she said. "What changed 4 months ago?" Celeste looked at the table. "I found out what the endgame was. Not for my father's operation, I knew about that. For Roman specifically," she paused. "My father doesn't plan to leave Roman in a position to cause problems once the operation is running through his infrastructure. He plans to ensure that Roman is implicated deeply enough in the new structure that Roman has no credibility, no legal standing, and no ability to object to anything." She looked up. "And then he plans to let someone else discover the implication. He's going to hand Roman to law enforcement," Vivian said, "once Roman's infrastructure is fully converted. Yes, clean hands for my father. Roman carries the exposure. Dante gets managed privately." She said it flatly, the way you say something you've been living with for long enough that the horror of it has been worn down to just shape. "I was supposed to be Roman's wife by then. 18 months, my father said. After 18 months, I'd be positioned to—" He stopped. "To what?" Vivian said. "To not be there when it happened." Celeste's jaw tightened. "Planned an exit for me. A very careful, very clean exit. Time to occur about 60 days before Roman's exposure. A separation. Something sympathetic and private. I'd walk away clean and Roman would go down alone." Vivian looked at her. "He told you this." "He explained it to me as a feature," Celeste said. "My protection." He said it as though that made it something other than what it was. "What did you think it was?" "Thought it was my father using me to destroy a man I'd spent 16 months being positioned to marry." She said it with a controlled precision that suggested the word choice had been worked out in private over a long time. "I thought it was my father explaining to me, in the language of protection and strategy, that my value in this situation was as a mechanism, and that the mechanism had an operational lifespan, and that after the lifespan was done, I would be returned to my previous position, which was adjacent and irrelevant." The ventilation shaft outside the window made a low sound. Vivian said, "What do you have?" Celeste looked at her. "You came here," Vivian said. "You came here with something. You didn't walk into a federal building 40 minutes before anyone expected you to show up just to explain your father's timeline. What do you have?" Celeste reached into her jacket and put a phone on the table. 4 months of recorded conversations, she said. "My father, in his own home, in his own words, explaining the structure of what he built and who it serves, and what the plan was for Roman, and what the plan was for Dreggy, and what Dreggy has been promised in exchange for the oversight protection he's been providing. Vivian looked at the phone. Dredge on audio, she said. 2 conversations. My father relaying Dregg's specific requests. Not Dregg's himself, my father's voice, describing what Dregg wanted, in language specific enough to constitute direct evidence of the arrangement. Vivian thought about the dead man's switch on her burner phone. She thought about the material with Marsh. She thought about what Celeste audio, combined with the documentary chain she had assembled, meant for the connective tissue of the case. It meant it was unassailable. It meant there was no gap in the chain that a defense attorney could find and pull. It meant Dregg had no angle. Does your father know you recorded him? Vivian said. No. Does he know you're here? He thinks I'm at the hotel we're staying at on the north side. Celeste paused. He'll know I'm not there within about 45 minutes. Checks. Vivian looked at the phone on the table and then looked at Celeste and said, Give it to Marsh. I was trying to give it to Marsh when Fosse arrived, Celeste said, which is when I understood that this building is not as secure as it should be, and that whoever I talk to in here needs to be someone Marsh trusts outside his normal chain. He's working on that right now. How long? He said 90 minutes. He's been gone 40. Celeste nodded. She picked up the coffee and finished the rest of it and set the cup down with a small, precise sound. Outside the window, the ventilation shaft hummed. Then Vivian's burner phone rang. Not a message. A call. The burner phone was not supposed to receive calls. It was configured for outbound messages only, which meant someone had gone significantly out of their way to reach her on this number through channels they shouldn't have had access to. She looked at the screen. No name. A number she didn't recognize. Don't speak, said the voice on the other end. She recognized it. She had spent 2 years listening to it across dinner tables and in hallways, and in the background of meetings she was technically not part of. It was a voice that had spent 2 decades being the most competent person in any room and receiving none of the credit for it. Dante Rusk. I separated from Roman 40 minutes ago, Dante said. He knows I'm not coming back to the car. He's in the city. He found Petra's building address. She was gone when he got there. He's working off the last contact I gave him before I got out. Going to find the federal building within 20 minutes. He has 2 men with him. Vivian said nothing. Marrow has a man inside your building, Dante said. Not Foss. Someone lower. Someone in a maintenance role who reports movement on the floors. When Fosse's report goes back to Marrow in the next few minutes, Marrow is going to know where you are and what Celeste did, and the operational calculus is going to change very fast. He paused. You need to move Celeste before Marrow gets that report. Why are you telling me this? Vivian said. A brief silence. Because I'm standing in a parking garage 3 blocks from your building, about to call Marsh on the number I've been maintaining for 4 months, and I needed you to know the timeline before I made that call. Vivian looked at Celeste, who was watching her face, read the conversation, and pulling her own conclusions from it. Marsh knows about you, Vivian said. He'll know more in about 2 minutes, Dante said. Everything I have. Which is more than what you gave him. Because I was in rooms you were never in. Another pause. For what it's worth, I was always going to make this call. I needed the situation to be past the point where making it felt like a choice I was making for my own benefit. Is it past that point? Roman is 20 minutes from that building, Dante said, and Marrow's man is inside it. So yes, it's past that point. The line went dead. Vivian put the phone in her pocket and stood up. We need to move, she said to Celeste. Right now. The phone, take nothing else. Celeste stood. She picked up the phone with the recordings and put it inside her jacket without asking questions. That told Vivian something important about her, that she had been waiting for someone to issue a direction she could follow, and that 4 months of carrying this alone had been its own specific weight. They went to the door. Vivian opened it, looked both ways down the corridor, clear, and moved. The federal building had 3 stairwells. Vivian had noted them on the way in, the way she noted all exits in all buildings without deciding to. So old it was just perception now. She took Celeste to the one at the far end of the corridor, and they went down 2 floors and came out at a service level she hadn't been to, a lower hallway with different flooring and different lighting, and the particular ambient noise of a building's mechanical systems doing their work. She was looking for a specific kind of door, the kind that opened onto a service entrance rather than a lobby, the kind that didn't have a log or a camera or a security checkpoint on the exit side, because the security assumption was that the threat came from outside rather than inside. She found it at the end of the service level, next to a stack of supply crates. A metal door with a horizontal push bar, propped open 3 inches with a rubber wedge somebody had left there. She pushed it open. They came out into an alley that ran between the federal building and the building next to it, a narrow, ugly space full of the city's background infrastructure, dumpsters and utility boxes, and the smell of an industrial exhaust vent somewhere above them. Vivian stopped and listened. Nothing immediate. Traffic sound, which meant the alley opened onto a street. She moved toward the street side opening, keeping Celeste a step behind her, and stopped at the corner where the alley met the sidewalk and looked. Normal street. Lunch hour pedestrians. A food cart on the opposite corner. 3 parked cars. She scanned quickly, nobody sitting in them. No obvious surveillance posture. She stepped out. Walk normally, she said to Celeste. Don't look back. They walked. She was counting blocks in her head and thinking about where to go, not the parking garage where she'd left the duffel bag that was now potentially compromised, not Petra's location, which Roman had reached, not anywhere she'd been in the last 24 hours. She needed some lateral, somewhere that had nothing to do with her history in this city. Is there anywhere you've been in this city that your father doesn't know about? She said to Celeste without looking at her. What do you mean? A hotel you booked yourself. A restaurant you went to alone. Anywhere that isn't on the itinerary your father arranged. Celeste was quiet for half a block. There's a coffee place near the university. I went there twice last month when I told my father I was at a spa. How did you get there? I walked from the hotel. Did you use a card, cash? Vivian looked at her sideways. Planned that. I've been planning for 4 months, Celeste said quietly. I just didn't know what I was planning toward. They kept moving. Coffee place was 9 blocks away. 9 blocks on a normal day was nothing. 9 blocks with Roman 20 minutes from this location, and Marrow's operational picture, reorganizing in real time, was a different calculation. Vivian thought about the 2 men with Roman, and where Roman's head was right now. Was he coming to stop her? Or was he coming because he needed to understand what she was doing? Were 2 very different operational postures, with very different implications for those 2 men. Thought about Dante calling Marsh. She thought about what 22 years of interior knowledge of the Valenti operations sounded like to a federal prosecutor who had been building a case from the outside for 8 months. She thought, if Dante actually does it, if he gives Marsh everything, the case doesn't need me anymore. Doesn't need Celeste recordings. It becomes self-sufficient. She thought, that should feel like relief. It didn't feel entirely like relief, because there was a variable still loose in the city, and that variable was Roman. And the loose variable problem had a way of resolving itself in the worst possible way when nobody was managing it. They were 4 blocks from the coffee place when she heard it. A car, moving against the flow of the pedestrian rhythm, too slow for traffic, too deliberate for someone looking for parking. She didn't look directly at it. She adjusted her angle slightly, using a parked delivery van as cover, and in the gap between the van and the car ahead of it, she got a look at the vehicle. Black sedan. 2 people visible in the front. She recognized the man in the passenger seat. She had not met him before, but she had seen his face in one of the photographs in Dante's files, a photograph she had memorized along with a name, the way she had memorized everything useful over 18 months. His name was Pryor. He worked for Gerald Marrow directly, not through Dante's structure, not through the Valenti operation. He was Gerald Marrow's personal problem solver. Marrow had gotten the report. Don't change your pace, she said to Celeste. What? Don't change your pace. Don't look left. Keep walking. She felt Celeste's stride hitch slightly and then stabilize. Good. Whatever 4 months of living inside her father's world had done to her, it had given her the ability to manage her body under pressure. The sedan was moving parallel to them, half a block back. Not accelerating, keeping pace. Vivian thought, they're looking for an isolated moment. They're not going to do anything on a crowded midday sidewalk. They're waiting for a gap. She thought about the gaps between here and the coffee place. Stretch near the parking structure quieter, more commercial, less foot traffic. The alley that cut through the middle of the next block, if you were heading the most direct route. She altered course by 2 degrees, not a turn. Just a drift, the kind of adjustment that looked like someone following a thought rather than a route change. She moved them more fully into the lunch hour pedestrian flow, staying close to storefronts, using the other people as mass. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it while walking. A message from the same channel that had been tracking Roman's movement. Valenti on foot, 2 blocks north of Federal Building, moving south. South was toward her. She thought, Roman from the north, Marrow's man from the east, the Federal Building behind her, with a compromised interior. She thought, the coffee place is now the wrong destination. She looked at the street around her and made a fast decision, the kind of decision that comes not from calculation, but from the accumulated processing of 2 years of living in situations where decisions had to come fast or not at all. Stop walking. Celeste stopped a half step later, looked at her. Give me the phone, Vivian said. What? The recordings. Give me the phone right now. Celeste pulled it from her jacket and passed it over. Vivian took it, opened the encrypted app she'd been using since she left Chicago, and in 45 seconds transferred the audio files to the same Dead Man Switch repository as everything else, then handed the phone back. The recordings are in a safe location now, regardless of what happens to that phone, she said, or to us. Celeste looked at her. What are we doing? Vivian looked north. 2 blocks north was where Roman was coming from. Behind them and east, Marrow's sedan was looking for a gap. She said, we're going toward Roman. That Celeste stopped herself. Came here alone. He sent Dante away and he came alone, which means he's not here operationally. He's here because he needs to understand what's happening. She was already walking north as she said it. Marrow's people won't move on us if we're standing next to Roman Valenti. Marrow's entire architecture depends on Roman not understanding what Marrow has been building. The moment Roman understands it, Marrow loses his cover. He can't move openly against Roman. He could move against all 3 of us, Celeste said, keeping pace. He could try, Vivian said. On a public street at noon, with a federal case already in motion, and Dante Russ currently in a parking garage 3 blocks away, talking to the prosecutor who's been building that case, yes, he could try. Kept walking. She found Roman at the corner of 2 streets she didn't know the names of, standing next to a parked car that was not the car he'd driven from Chicago, in a gray overcoat she had never seen him wear, looking like a man who had arrived somewhere and was not certain what came next. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He was 20 feet away. Around them, the lunch crowd moved and parted, and moved again, indifferent. A bus went past. Someone's coffee cup hit a trash can and missed. Roman looked at Vivian. Then he looked at the woman beside her. His jaw went rigid. Walk with us, Vivian said without stopping. Don't stand still. There are people 2 blocks behind us. He fell into step beside her without asking why, because he had spent 20 years in situations where someone saying don't stand still meant exactly what it meant, and the time for questions came after. He looked at Celeste as he walked. Why is she? She's the reason the case goes all the way to Dreg, Vivian said. She has 4 months of your living room on audio. Roman's stride broke for 1 step and then recovered. My living room, he said. Your meetings? With her father. 4 months of Gerald Marrow explaining his plan for you in his own words. Roman looked at Celeste. Celeste met his eyes. She said nothing. There was nothing to say and she knew it. Roman looked forward. His face had done something not an expression she had seen before, a compound thing, fury and the specific devastation of hearing that the betrayal was larger and older and more detailed than you had understood. How long, he said. 16 months, Vivian said, since before Celeste was introduced to you. Dante was brought in 14 months ago. The whole engagement was engineered from the beginning. Roman said nothing. They walked. After half a block, he said very quietly, and you knew. I found the correspondence 3 weeks ago. You sat on it. I was figuring out the shape of it. You sat on it, he said again. Not an accusation, just a fact being absorbed. For 3 weeks, you had evidence that someone was planning to end my operation, and possibly end me personally, and you sat on it. Yes. Why? She thought about the most honest answer. Because burning you completely wasn't what I wanted. Because Marrow and Dredge were the actual target, and I needed the case to point there, not get consumed by what you are. She looked at him sideways. And because you had already humiliated me in front of every person in your organization, so you'll understand if I took a few weeks to decide how much I owed you. A sound came out of Roman that was not quite a laugh. Rough and involuntary and almost human. Fair, he said. They turned a corner. Behind them, further now they'd put distance on, she could still feel the weight of the sedan in the edges of her awareness. She did not look back. Dante's talking to Marsh, she said. Roman absorbed this when now, in a parking garage. He separated from your car 40 minutes ago and called me to tell me the timeline. Called you. He's been maintaining a line to Marsh for months, Vivian said. He was hedging. He finally chose which way to fall. Roman was quiet for a moment. What did he give Marsh? Everything he has, which is more than I had. Then it's done, Roman said. Not a question. The case is going to be built, Vivian said. The question is how it's built and who it targets. That's what I've been trying to manage. You've been managing the shape of a federal case, Roman said. Yes, against me. Against Marrow and Dreg. You're in it, but you're not the center of it. He walked for half a block without responding. Then he said, the two men behind us. His personal staff. Not connected to your operation. How many? 2 in the car that I saw. There could be more I haven't identified. Roman reached into his coat. She put her hand on his arm without looking at him. Don't. They're a problem. They're a problem that gets worse if you make a move on a public street with a federal case in active construction, she said. They're not going to touch us out here. Marrow's exposure is too significant right now. You're sure? I'm not sure of anything, she said. I'm making the best calculation I have with what I know. His arm stayed still under her hand. They walked another half block. Then he said quietly, I left you to figure this out alone. She didn't answer that. I made a decision without asking you anything, he said. Without looking at what I actually had, which was... He stopped. Don't, she said. I'm not apologizing. I know what you're doing, she said. Don't do it on a street with Marrow's people behind us. It's not the moment. He was quiet, they walked. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Marsh, she answered. Where are you? Marsh said. Street level. 3 blocks north of your building. I have Celeste Marrow with me, and I have Roman Valenti. A brief silence. All 3 of you, yes. Get back to the building. Use the north entrance. I'm sending someone to meet you there. Is it secure? The person I'm sending, yes. I've identified the Marrow contact on my floor, currently being detained. Marsh's voice was tight and controlled, the voice of someone managing several things simultaneously. And I've been on the phone with Calloway for the last 20 minutes. She's taking the case, the Dreg's material, all of it. She's outside Dreg's jurisdictional influence. He paused. Rusk is with me. He's been talking for 30 minutes, and he hasn't stopped. Get back to the building. Vivian ended the call. She looked at Roman. She looked at Celeste. We're going back, she said. They turned, and that was when Pryor got out of the car. He did it 2 blocks behind them, moving quickly, not running the precise controlled pace of someone with a specific objective and training in not drawing attention while pursuing it. He had a second man with him who had come from a different direction, from a side street, which meant the approach had been coordinated. They had been waiting for exactly this the moment the 3 of them turned around and headed back toward the building. The moment that retracing the route created a window. Vivian saw it and made the calculation in under a second. Roman, she said, he said. Don't run, she said. If we run, they have an excuse. They already have an excuse, he said. Marrow gave it to them an hour ago. The distance between them and Pryor was shrinking. Block and a half. A block. Vivian looked at Celeste. When I tell you to walk, you walk directly toward the federal building entrance, and you do not stop for any reason, and you do not look back. Celeste's face was pale and very controlled. All right, half a block. Pryor's pace had increased. The second man was cutting the angle from the side, coming in diagonally. Roman stepped slightly ahead of Vivian, and she understood immediately that he was positioning himself between her and the approach, a physical instinct so automatic it required no decision. And she understood also that this was the most honest thing he had said, since he'd fallen into step beside her 20 minutes ago. Celeste, Vivian said. Celeste walked. Vivian stood on the sidewalk next to Roman Valenti, with Gerald Marrow's man 30 feet away and closing, and with everything she had spent 3 weeks building now in the hands of 2 federal prosecutors and a repentant lieutenant in a parking garage, and with the street full of ordinary people who had no idea what was converging in the space they were walking through. Pryor reached them. He stopped 3 feet away. Up close he was bigger than he'd looked from the alley wide through the shoulders, with hands that had done functional work, and a face that did not bother with expression. He looked at Roman. He looked at Vivian. He said Marrow would like a conversation. Roman said, Tell Mr. Marrow he's going to be having a very different conversation than the one he planned for. Pryor's eyes moved to Vivian. The material you gave the prosecutor this morning is already beyond your reach, Vivian said. And the prosecutor is already talking to someone outside this jurisdiction. So whatever Mr. Marrow instructed you to recover or prevent the timeline for that has passed. Something moved in Pryor's face. Not doubt men like him didn't do doubt, but a recalibration, the specific assessment of a man who has been given an objective and is now determining whether the objective is still achievable. The second man had stopped 6 feet to the side. He was watching Roman. Roman was watching Pryor. Vivian was watching all of it and counting seconds and thinking about the federal building entrance a block and a half behind her, and a person Marsh had sent to meet them, and whether that person was already there or was still on their way. Pryor said, "Come with us." "No," Roman said. "That's not a request, Mr. Valenti." "I know what it is," Roman said. His voice had the flat quality she had heard in his kitchen at 4 in the morning, the quality that preceded consequences. "And I'm telling you it's not happening. You're standing on a public street at noon, with cameras on every building corner and a federal investigation that has your employer's name in it. And if you take one more step toward either of us, you are personally going to become part of that investigation." Pryor looked at him. The look went on for 3 seconds, 4, 5. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Something changed in his face. Not much men like him didn't show much but enough. He looked at Vivian. He looked at Roman. He took 1 step back. He turned, and the second man turned with him, and they walked back toward the sedan. Roman watched them go. Vivian let out a breath she had been holding for 90 seconds, slow and controlled, through her nose. "Dante," Roman said. "What?" He told Marsh something that changed Marrow's calculation. Something that made moving on us right now too expensive. He watched the sedan pull out. "What did he give them?" "I don't know yet," Vivian said. "It was big," Roman said. "Whatever it was, Marrow just pulled his people off us, which means Dante gave Marsh something that puts Marrow at risk if Pryor takes an action on a public street." Vivian thought about 22 years. About all the rooms Dante had been in that no one else had been in. About all the things written down nowhere. "It was probably Dreg," she said. Direct. Something Dante heard directly. In person. In a room. That puts Dreg in the middle of Marrow's structure in a way that can't be contextualized. She paused. Something that makes any action Marrow takes in the next 24 hours look like obstruction. Roman turned and looked at the federal building entrance, a block and a half away. Then he looked at her. "Walk with me," he said. It was the same thing she had said to him 20 minutes ago, on this same street, and she understood that he knew that and that the echo was intentional. She walked with him. Celeste was already at the north entrance when they got there, standing with a woman in a dark blazer who had the specific bearing of someone in law enforcement who had been doing it long enough that it had stopped being a posture and become just how she stood. The woman looked at Vivian when they arrived and said, "I'm from Calloway's office." Vivian looked at her. "Marsh said to tell you the case is being moved tonight," the woman said. "Full transfer to Calloway's jurisdiction. The dredge material goes with it." She paused. "And he said to tell you that Rusk is requesting a formal cooperation agreement, which Calloway is prepared to grant, and that the cooperation agreement will include testimony covering 16 months of direct documented contact with Gerald Marrow." She looked at Vivian steadily. "Covers you, Miss Cross. The cooperation framework includes a provision for your testimony and your protection. Ready to sign." Vivian looked at the building entrance. At the door she had walked through alone 3 hours ago, with a manila envelope and a dead man's switch, and no guarantee that any of it was going to go any way other than sideways. Roman was standing to her right, not touching her, not speaking. Just present, the way he had been present on the sidewalk when he'd stepped between her and Pryor a physical fact, without agenda, letting her make the decision. She looked at the woman from Calloway's office. She said, "Take me inside." The signing took 40 minutes. Not because the documents were complicated. Calloway's office had prepared a cooperation framework that was precise and unambiguous. The product of someone who had been building toward exactly this kind of moment for 18 months and had the paperwork ready, because she had always believed the moment would come. It took 40 minutes because Vivian read every page, all 23 of them. She sat at a table secure room 2 floors below, where she had started the day, with the woman from Calloway's office across from her and a junior attorney beside her, going through each clause. She read every word at the pace of someone who had learned, at significant personal cost, that the details other people considered formalities were usually where the actual decisions lived. Roman sat in a chair against the wall the whole time. Nobody had asked him to leave. Nobody had asked him to stay. He had simply sat down when she started reading, and she had not told him to go, and the arrangement had held. Celeste was in a separate room down the hall, going through her own process with different attorneys and different documents. Vivian could hear, faintly, the low, continuous sound of voices through the wall, not words, just the texture of a conversation that had a lot of ground to cover. When Vivian signed the last page, she set the pen down on the table and looked at her hand for a moment. The pen had left a faint pressure mark on her index finger. She looked at it, then looked up at the woman from Calloway's office. "What happens now?" she said. "Calloway files for emergency jurisdiction transfer tonight. The dredge connection elevates this to a level that bypasses the normal chain." The woman gathered the documents carefully, the way people handle things that have just become significant. Warrants go out for Gerald Marrow within 48 hours. Pryor and anyone else in his operational structure gets swept in through the Marrow arrest. She paused. Dredge is a longer process. The political dimension requires more careful handling. But the audio from Miss Marrow's recordings, combined with the documentary chain you provided, and Rusk's testimony, gives Calloway what she needs to build it without rushing. Dante, Vivian said. His cooperation agreement is being finalized now. He'll be processed separately. The woman looked at her. He's been talking for 2 hours. He apparently had a great deal to say. Vivian thought about 22 years of rooms and decisions and the specific weight of being the most important person in every situation while nobody wrote your name on anything. "Yes," she said, "I imagine he did." The woman left with the documents. Vivian sat in the chair and did not move for a moment. The room was the same carpet and fluorescent light category as the rest of the building, functional and impersonal, designed to be a space where things happened rather than a space where anyone wanted to be. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the table. She looked at the pen she had put down. Roman said from the chair against the wall, "You read all 23 pages." "Yes." "Most people don't. Most people end up surprised by page 19, she said. He made the sound again, that rough, involuntary thing that lived somewhere between a laugh and an acknowledgement. She had heard it twice now. Both times it had surprised her, because it sounded like something that came from underneath the version of Roman Valenti that 20 years of being Roman Valenti had constructed on top of whatever was originally there. She turned and looked at him. He looked tired in a way that was not the tired of a bad night. It was the tired of a man who had been running something enormous for a very long time, and had just, in the span of about 14 hours, watched it become something he could no longer run. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his hands loose between them, and he was looking at the floor, and he looked, more than anything else, like someone who had put down something extremely heavy and was not yet certain whether the feeling was relief or loss or both simultaneously. "What do they want from you?" Vivian said. He looked up. "Formally? Nothing yet. I came in voluntarily." "That changes the conversation," he paused. "My attorney is going to tell me that voluntary cooperation at this stage, combined with the complexity of what Calloway is building, gives me a position. But certain things can be negotiated." He looked at her steadily. "I'm going to listen to my attorney." "That's a first," she said. Something moved in his face. "Yes," he said, "it is." She turned back to the table. She looked at the place where the documents had been, now just a clean surface with a pen on it. "The operation," she said. "The whole structure." "It's gone," Roman said. It was gone the moment Dante sat down with Marsh. Dante knows where every body is buried in 22 years of that organization. Literally and otherwise. He said it without drama. Just information being processed. Whatever I might have tried to preserve, it's not a realistic conversation anymore. Are you all right with that? He thought about the question seriously, which she hadn't entirely expected. She had expected deflection, or performance, or the version of Roman Valenti that treated personal questions as tactical maneuvering. "I don't know yet," he said. "Ask me in 6 months." She nodded. That was the most honest answer he could have given. She stood up. She picked up her jacket from the back of the chair and put it on and picked up the burner phone, which now had a set of documents saved to it that she was not going to need to use. She looked at the phone for a moment, thinking about the Dead Man's Switch repositories. She had built 3 of them, different contacts, different timelines. She sent each of them the counterman code, one by one. Short messages that meant, "Stand down." It resolved. "The material is where it needs to be. You can close the channel." She watched the messages send. Then she put the phone in her pocket and looked at Roman. "I'm going to find somewhere to sleep," she said. He stood up. "No," she said, not unkindly, but clearly. He looked at her. He didn't argue. That was also something she hadn't entirely expected a man who had spent 20 years not hearing no from anyone sitting with no instead of moving against it. All right, he said. She walked to the door. Vivian, he said. She stopped but didn't turn around. The ring, he said. I've had it since that night. I don't know why I kept carrying it. A pause. I don't know what I thought I was going to do with it. She thought about the ring. The oval diamond in platinum, sitting on the wedding invitation, the first image she had looked at, when she understood what the rest of the night was going to be. Keep it, she said. Or get rid of it. Either way, it's not mine. She walked out. Gerald Marrow was arrested at 7:14 the following morning. At the hotel on the north side of the city where he had been waiting for a situation report from Pryor that was never going to come. He was in the middle of room service breakfast when the door came in, which was the kind of specific detail that made the papers. Vivian read about it 3 days later. Sitting in Petra's new apartment, a sublet in a different part of the city, arranged through a channel Petra had used before for exactly this kind of relocation need. The apartment was smaller than the one they'd left, with better light and noisier plumbing. Smelled like somebody else's cooking, and the particular dusty warmth of an old radiator doing its best. She read the article twice. It described Marrow's arrest in the spare language of early coverage, the charges, the federal jurisdiction, the cooperation of multiple witnesses. It mentioned in the fourth paragraph that a sitting U.S. senator was under investigation in connection with the case. It did not name the senator yet. That would come in 3 more days in a different paper when Calloway authorized the disclosure. Vivian set the paper down and picked up her coffee. Petra came in from the kitchen and sat across from her without asking how she was, which was one of the things Vivian genuinely appreciated about Petra. She looked at the paper on the table and she looked at Vivian's face. And she poured her own coffee and they sat in the radiator warmth and didn't say anything for a while. Then Petra said, Celeste. She's in protective housing, Vivian said. Calloway's arrangement. She'll be there until the Marrow trial. After that. She lifted her hand slightly. She's 28 years old. She has an undergraduate degree in economics and 4 months of recorded conversations with her father. She'll figure it out. She came there herself, Petra said. She didn't wait. No, Vivian said. She didn't wait. She thought about Celeste's face in that room, the stripped-down version, the one without the performance. She's stronger than anyone in that situation gave her credit for, including her father. Petra looked at the paper. And Roman. Vivian turned her coffee cup in a circle, a slow rotation. His attorney has been in conversation with Calloway's office. Cooperating. She paused. He gave them the account structure for the whole northern operation. Complete. Unprompted. Another pause, which apparently surprised Calloway because she had been prepared to negotiate for it. Petra raised an eyebrow. Why did he do it unprompted? Vivian thought about Roman in the chair against the wall, reading all 23 pages over her shoulder without saying a word. She thought about Pryor on the sidewalk and the way Roman had stepped forward, that automatic, unconsidered physical placement of himself between her and the approach. I think, she said. He decided to stop calculating what he could keep. Petra looked at her. And you, I'm sitting here, Vivian said. That's not what I'm asking. Vivian turned the cup another slow rotation. Outside the window, the city was doing its mid-morning business, a delivery truck, the sound of someone's music from 2 floors up, a child's voice from somewhere below. I don't know yet, she said. I spent 2 years building toward a specific outcome, and the outcome happened, and I'm still catching up to the fact that it happened, that it actually worked. She looked at Petra. I keep waiting for the part where it didn't. That's what surviving does, Petra said. It takes a while for your nervous system to believe you're done. They sat with that for a while. Dante Rusk's cooperation agreement was formalized 11 days after his conversation with Marsh in the parking garage. He entered a residential program in a location that was not disclosed to anyone outside Calloway's office. He would testify when the trial reached a point that required him. Until then, he was, in the technical language of the arrangement, a protected federal witness. Vivian learned this through Marsh, who called her once to update her on the case status and twice to ask clarifying questions about specific documents. He was professional and efficient on all 3 calls, and on the last one, before he ended the call, he said, "You built something very precise, Ms. Cross. I want you to know that." She said, "Thank you." He said, "Most people in your position would have used it faster and less carefully. Most people in my position didn't spend 2 years watching how it all connected," she said. He ended the call. She sat with the phone for a moment and thought about what precise meant in that context, what it to someone whose job was to take assembled material and turn it into a prosecutable case. It meant the difference between an investigation that went somewhere and one that got picked apart at the seams. It meant the difference between Dreg being a name in the paper and Dreg standing in a courtroom. She didn't feel pride exactly. She felt something quieter. The specific feeling of having done a thing correctly, which is its own category separate from triumph. She went back to Chicago at the end of the month. Not to Roman's house. That address was in the hands of liquidators working through the asset forfeiture process, and the house had been emptied of the specific kind of significance it used to carry anyway. She went back because she had a storage unit there with the contents of her life before Roman boxes she had packed 31 months ago when she had moved into his orbit, boxes she had paid the monthly fee on because she had never fully believed at any point that she was staying. She rented a car at the airport and drove to the storage facility and unlocked the unit and stood in the doorway looking at the stacked boxes. There were 14 of them. Her books, her clothes, her mother's dishes, a lamp she had carried through 4 apartments, the materials from a design certification course she had been taking before her life redirected, 2 boxes of work samples from a job she had liked, freelance visual work, branding and layout, the kind of thing she was good at and had let go of because being in Roman's world had not left space for a career that was genuinely hers. She stood in the storage unit doorway and looked at the boxes for a long time. Then she started loading them into the car. It took 3 trips. On the second trip, she found a box she had forgotten, a small one. At the back, labeled in her own handwriting, Miss Keep. She opened it sitting on the concrete floor of the storage unit with the fluorescent light above her and found, among other things, a photograph of herself at 22 in a city she had been visiting, standing in front of something she couldn't remember the name of now, laughing at something off camera. She looked at the photograph. She looked at her own face in it open, a little loud, the face of someone who hadn't yet learned to file away everything she was feeling. She put the photograph in her jacket pocket and closed the box and kept loading. Roman came to find her 6 weeks after the signing. She knew he would. She had not known when or how, or what he would say when he got there, but she had known he would come. Because that was the kind of man. He was not a man who made speeches or sent intermediaries, but a man who showed up physically when he had something to resolve. Because physical presence was the language he was most fluent in. He found her at the studio space. She had rented a small second-floor room in a building on the west side, with big windows and bad electrical, and the particular smell of new paint and old wood that she had decided, the first time she walked in, was exactly the smell a beginning should have. She had been using it for 10 days. She had set up a drafting table near the windows and a rack along the wall, and she had started 3 different pieces and abandoned 2 of them and kept working on the third because it refused to be abandoned. She heard the knock on the door and said, "Come in," without looking up because she was in the middle of something that required looking at what she was doing. He came in and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the space. You could feel him looking at it, the way you feel a change in the light, peripheral and certain. She set down what she was holding and looked at him. He looked different than he had in the federal building. Not dramatically, he was wearing different clothes, a dark sweater instead of the gray overcoat, and he had the look of a man who had been living without certain structures that had previously organized his face, and was figuring out what the underlying architecture looked like. Constructed. She wasn't sure yet whether that was better or just different. "How did you find this address?" she said. "Petra told me," he said. She was going to have a conversation with Petra about that. "Come in or stay in the doorway," she said. "But decide." Came in. He looked at the rack along the wall, the first finished piece hanging there, a long structured garment in gray and ivory that had started as an exercise and become something she was considering seriously. He looked at the drafting table. He looked at the third piece in progress. "The dress," he said. "The first piece in a collection," she said. "Not the dress. The dress is gone. I gave it to a resale place in Evanston. What happened to it?" "Someone bought it," she said. "I don't know who. Someone who needed a dress." He turned from the rack and looked at her. The late afternoon light was coming through the big windows at a low angle, the kind of light that made everything in a room look like it was being examined carefully. He stood in it and looked at her, and did not perform anything, no arrangement of his expression toward a particular effect, no management of the distance between them. Just present, exactly as he was. "My attorney says I'm looking at a fine and a supervised period," he said. "No incarceration." The cooperation weighed heavily. I know, she said, I heard. The accounts are gone. The territory is gone. He stopped. Everything I built or inherited and rebuilt, it's gone. I have a personal reserve that predates the operation and didn't touch it, which is enough to live on, and nothing else. What are you going to do? She said. He looked at the windows. I don't know yet. He said it the same way he'd answered her, in the federal building, with the specific honesty of someone who has stopped performing certainty. I've been thinking about that for 6 weeks, and I genuinely don't know. I've been running something since I was 23 years old. I don't know what I do when I'm not running something. You figure it out, she said, like everyone else. He looked at her. I came, he said, because I wanted to say something. All right. Not an apology, he said. I said that in the federal building, and you told me it wasn't the moment, and you were right. And I've been thinking about whether there is a moment for it, and I've decided there isn't. Because an apology implies I can make it even, and I can't make it even. What I did to you in that meeting room with the door open. He stopped again. She watched him find his way through it. I made a decision about your life in a room you weren't in, based on what was useful for me, and I told myself it was practical, which is the language I used to use for things I didn't want to examine. He looked at her with the directness that had been, was still, the most disarming thing about him. I'm not asking you to forgive that. I wanted you to know that I know what it was. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light moved slightly as a cloud passed outside. She thought about the door left open. She thought about sitting on the edge of the bed with the ring in her fingers, feeling the fever break. She thought about the train in the dark, and the burner phone, and Petra's kitchen table, and 23 pages of cooperation documents, and a parking garage, and a sidewalk at noon, and a man stepping between her and the approach without deciding to. She thought about all the versions of this conversation she had rehearsed in her head over 6 weeks, the versions where she was cutting, or final, or cold in the particular way that communicates volumes without admitting anything. She had been good at those versions. She said, I know you know. He nodded. That's not nothing, she said. I want you to understand that I'm not saying it's nothing. Most men in your position would have spent these 6 weeks finding reasons why what they did was reasonable. I thought about it, he said. I couldn't make it stick. Good, she said. They stood in the studio with the light between them and the finished piece on the rack, and the third piece in progress on the drafting table, and the particular quiet of a room where 2 people are being honest with each other without knowing quite where it's going. I'm not in the same place I was, she said. When you found me 2 years ago, I was surviving. I was managing a situation, and I had been managing situations for so long that I had stopped being able to tell the difference between managing and living. She looked at the piece on the rack. I'm not doing that anymore. I don't want to do that anymore. I know, he said. Which means I don't have the same calculus I had, about what I need from people, about what's acceptable. She looked at him, which means I'm not going to be practical about this. I'm not going to weigh it against what makes sense. What are you going to do, he said. Nothing right now, she said. I'm going to work. I'm going to finish what I'm building here, and then start the next thing. I'm going to have a life that is actually mine for what might be the first time since I was 19 years old, and I'm going to see what that feels like. He said nothing. If you want to be part of that, she paused. Not part of what I'm building, not a protection or a resource or a structure. If you want to be a person who knows another person who's trying to figure out what their life looks like, that's a conversation we can have in time. When you figured out what you're doing, he looked at her for a long time. That's less than I hoped for, he said. She said. And more than I deserve, he said. Also yes, she said. Something crossed his face that she didn't have a word for. Not relief, not gratitude, something older than both of those. The expression of a man who has been told the truth by someone who had every reason not to bother, and who is feeling the specific weight of having been given that anyway. He reached into his coat pocket. He set the ring on the edge of the drafting table. He didn't say anything about it. He just set it there, and she looked at it, and she didn't say anything about it either. And somehow that was the most complete exchange they had managed in 2 years of trying. He walked to the door. He paused there without turning around the same position. She noticed that Dante had held in Roman's study on the night everything broke open. Something about doorways and unfinished things. The piece on the rack, he said. What's it called? She looked at it. The gray and ivory structure, something between an architectural drawing and a garment, built out of the materials of a previous version of her life. I haven't named it yet, she said. When you do, he said, I'd like to know. He walked out. She listened to his footsteps go down the stairs. She listened to the street door close below. She stood in the studio with the light still coming through the big windows, and the third piece unfinished on the table, and the ring sitting on the edge of the drafting table where he had set it. She didn't move for a moment. Then she turned back to the table and picked up what she'd been working on and kept working. Outside, the city went on. The light through the windows changed slowly, the way late afternoon light does, turning from examining to something softer, the kind of light that doesn't press against things, but just rests on them, making them look like what they are rather than what they're supposed to be. Vivian worked. She worked until the light was gone and the room was lit only by the work lamp above the drafting table, that small yellow circle of directed purpose, and then she worked a little more, past the point of tired, into the particular clarity that comes after tired, where the hands know what they're doing without the brain making so many decisions about it. At some point, she stopped and sat in the chair beside the table and looked at what she'd made. It wasn't finished. It was closer than it had been this morning. It had the shape of something it had been trying to be since she'd started it, and she could see it now. The finished version, the way it would look when it was done, and the seeing of it was its own kind of quiet satisfaction. She looked at the ring on the edge of the table. She picked it up. She turned it over in her fingers the way Roman had turned it over for 6 weeks, and she understood now why he hadn't been able to put it down, not because of sentiment, not because of loss, but because it was an unresolved question that the hands kept returning to, looking for an answer they hadn't found yet. She set it back down. She got up, turned off the work lamp, and put on her jacket. She looked around the studio in the dark, the rack, the drafting table, the windows showing the city lit up against a sky that had gone all the way to black while she was working. She picked up her bag. She left the ring on the drafting table. She walked down the stairs and out into the street, into the cold and the noise and the ordinary relentless fact of the city at night, and she turned toward the block where she had parked, and she walked, and she did not look back at the lit windows of the studio above her, because the woman who was always looking for the exit had, for the first time in a very long time, stopped at the threshold and turned inward instead. What was behind her was hers now. What was ahead of her was hers too. She kept walking.